Chapter 301. Jiang, here's a drink and some roasted meat for you. Holding a glass of juice and a plate of roasted beef, Aphrodite walked into the captain's cabin and looked at Jiang Hai, who was looking at the GPS while steering the ship. After boarding the ship, Aphrodite and the others returned to their respective rooms. The rooms on this ship were definitely not enough for each of them, so they naturally lived together. Except for Jiang Hai, who lived alone, the others had at least 2 people to a room. Fortunately, they didn't mind. After putting their luggage in the room, they went to change into their swimsuits. Although the ship was still sailing and they couldn't swim in the sea, it didn't prevent them from playing on the deck. Unknowingly, it was noon, so they began to make lunch on the deck. Coming out to play naturally couldn't be like playing at home. Although the ship's kitchen was very complete, they still had to roast the roasted meat. However, they still prepared to eat the barbecued meat. Based on the current situation, they had already lit the fire and roasted it well. Oh, thank you. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai first set the GPS route, then turned his head and smiled at Aphrodite. But when he saw her, the smile on his face couldn't help but stiffen. Because Aphrodite was wearing the bikini she wore at the beach that day. Jiang Hai had already seen this figure, but when he saw this outfit, he couldn't help but remember what happened that day. If it wasn't for that damn Qin Feng who came out to make trouble that day, something great might have happened between him and this beauty in front of him. Let's eat something first. Seeing Jiang Hai's stunned look and fiery gaze, Aphrodite's face couldn't help but blush. She was a little shy now, but she still liked how Jiang Hai looked at her. She deliberately took 2 steps forward, straightened her figure, and whispered to Jiang Hai. She liked how Jiang Hai looked at her. Oh, thank you. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai snapped out of his memories and couldn't help but smile awkwardly at her. Then, he took the juice and roasted meat. Jiang Hai didn't know if it was intentional, but when he took it, his hand naturally touched Aphrodite's. This made Aphrodite's face even redder, but unfortunately, Jiang Hai didn't go any further. Instead, he took these 2 things back to the chair and sat down to eat. He had to admit that although it wasn't the beef from his manor, these girls' roasted meat was much better than his. At least, the taste was quite good. Seeing Jiang Hai sitting on the captain's chair and eating the meat with relish, Aphrodite didn't leave. Instead, she sat directly in the chair opposite Jiang Hai and stared at Jiang Hai in a daze. To be honest, Jiang Hai's position in her heart had always been very strange. She really liked Jiang Hai, but this kind of like wasn't love. Because although she had recovered to her best state, she still felt very dirty. She didn't deserve Jiang Hai. Not to mention a wife, she didn't even deserve a lover. Aphrodite only wanted to be Jiang Hai's maid, servant, and subordinate. She wanted to help him do things that he needed her to do. As for mental work, she couldn't help Jiang Hai. She was very clear about her physical strength, and she wasn't very good at it either. In a situation where both her mental and physical strength were lacking, offering herself might be the best choice. But in the face of her repeated hints, Jiang Hai had always kept his distance. She could feel that Jiang Hai was impulsive towards her, but for some reason, he was always able to control his impulses. She knew that Jiang Hai was afraid of hurting her, but she wanted Jiang Hai to hurt her. She had to admit that Jiang Hai really didn't have much talent in these matters. You guys are really good. What are you roasting now? With Jiang Hai's appetite, the plate of barbecued meat in front of him was quickly devoured by him. Jiang Hai licked the sauce on his lips as if he hadn't had enough, and asked in satisfaction. We're roasting chicken meat right now. Our level is actually quite average, but the roasting oven here uses charcoal so the taste is better than the one in the oven. Add to that the scenery, what we eat isn't the most important thing. Aphrodite explained to Jiang Hai when she heard Jiang Hai's words. Jiang Hai also smiled as he looked outside the window. Jiang Hai's gaze was currently fixed on the scenery outside. The blue sky, white clouds, and the sea as blue as the blue sky. Add to that the warm sunlight, and it was indeed very attractive. Aren't you going out to play with us? After cleaning up Jiang Hai's plate and cup, Aphrodite hesitated for a bit before asking Jiang Hai. She rather hoped that Jiang Hai would come out with them. I won't, I'm going to stay here and watch the target's location. You guys have fun. However, Jiang Hai shook his head when he heard her words. He actually really wanted to see the firm skin of those beauties outside. However, he still had things to do right now. Aphrodite could only shrug her shoulders when she heard Jiang Hai's words. Her upper body bounced a couple of times before she took the plate and cup and left. Then I'll bring you food later. Looking at Aphrodite's departing figure, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smack his lips. Although he was a bit slow, how could he not know Aphrodite's feelings? In fact, it wasn't just Aphrodite. Dinah Taylor, Hilda Leonard, Peggy Hall, Shira Rodney, Odelia Cliff, Bridget Nelson, and Janice Joy. These 8 girls' thoughts were basically the same. He didn't know if it was because they really liked him, or if it was just to repay his kindness. If Jiang Hai wanted to do something with them now, they definitely wouldn't refuse and would instead take the initiative to stick to him. Just like what Aphrodite said when she was joking, they wouldn't mind if the 8 of them did it together. However, Jiang Hai would mind. Although he wasn't a gentleman, he wouldn't hesitate when it came to hunting. But after all, he was going to get married and have children in the future. Aphrodite, Dinah, and the other girls, if nothing unexpected happened, would probably stay in his manor for the rest of their lives. He couldn't give them any status. However, if something really happened, not to mention the awkwardness after the 2 sides met, just his future wife might not be able to accept such a situation. However, if something happened, Jiang Hai couldn't chase them away and let them go somewhere else. It was precisely because of this that Jiang Hai was obviously a rabbit that didn't eat the grass near its burrow. He wasn't a very brave person and was especially conflicted. However, to be honest, Jiang Hai was also very depressed in his heart when faced with the temptations of these girls all day long. There were beauties asking you to come, but you were still in a state where you wanted to come, yet you couldn't. How depressing was that? In the past few days, the time he troubled Little left and right at night was clearly more frequent than when he was in Winthrop. Originally, he wanted to find the front desk to have some fun, but these girls were watching him so closely that it was really difficult for him to do so. Beep 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 beep. Just as Jiang Hai was thinking about the curves of these girls, to the point that even his big brother had some reaction, the satellite GPS in front of him couldn't help but ring. On the vast sea, there were no strong winds, but it was very easy to get lost while sailing on the sea. Jiang Hai's target this time wasn't any land, nor was it any small island. There were no points of reference, just an ocean. When there was only Jiang Hai, it didn't matter. He just had to head towards this point and gallop under the sea. However, now that the ship had set sail, Jiang Hai needed to avoid those big ships, cargo ships, and the like. At the same time, he also needed to not deviate from the route. Therefore, there was no way to set the ship on autopilot. He could only make adjustments here and there every now and then. This was also the fundamental reason why he didn't go out to play with those girls. Fortunately, after a few hours of sailing, Jiang Hai finally arrived at his target. According to the coordinates on the GPS, if nothing unexpected happened, his ship was now above the crack. The sonar at the bottom of the ship also proved Jiang Hai's conjecture. The bottomless image below made Jiang Hai grin. He had already completed the first step. Although the ship wasn't slow, it still took a lot of time. Casually drifting away from the crack, Jiang Hai stopped the ship and breathed a sigh of relief. Next, he had to prepare for the operation at night. This time, he wasn't just going to get the set of armor. In addition to that set of armor, Jiang Hai also wasn't going to let go of the jewelry worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Looking at the numbers that kept echoing back in the sonar, Jiang Hai also left the captain's cabin and walked back to his room. He needed to see if he had prepared enough things first. After confirming everything, Jiang Hai left the cabin. Hey, Jiang Hai, you're here. Seeing Jiang Hai coming out, Daliana couldn't help but smile and ask. I feel that the ship has stopped. Are we there yet? Hearing Daliana's words, Marian also raised her head and asked Jiang Hai. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also nodded and said, "Oh, let's play here today and spend the night here. We'll go back tomorrow." Patting the heads of the two girls, Jiang Hai explained with a smile. He had work to do tonight. Although they didn't understand what Jiang Hai wanted to do, this didn't stop them from being very obedient. They also knew that they came here to play, but Jiang Hai didn't come here to play. He had important things to do. Chapter 302. Guns, no problem. Spear guns, no problem. Protective clothing, no problem. Stab-resistant clothing, no problem. Looking at the things on the bed in front of him, Jiang Hai couldn't help but whisper. This afternoon, he played with Delina and the others for the whole afternoon. He had to admit that playing with these girls always passed very quickly. Unknowingly, it was already night time. At night, Jiang Hai and the others specially cooked a pot of seafood porridge. After all, the barbecue grill didn't stop in the afternoon. It can be said that they ate for the whole day. It would be strange if they could eat in the evening. So at night, they only ate some porridge. After eating dinner, it was only 8 o'clock. Jiang Hai drove them back to their room and told them that no matter what they heard outside, they shouldn't come out unless Jiang Hai called them. There was a separate bathroom in these rooms. Jiang Hai also specially prepared snacks and water for them, so they really didn't need to come out. After listening to Jiang Hai's words, Aphrodite and the others didn't ask why. Because they simply didn't want to know, nor did they want to understand why Jiang Hai was like this. The only thing they needed to do was to listen to Jiang Hai. Even if Jiang Hai said that the sky was the moon during the day and the sky was the sun at night, they would still firmly stand on Jiang Hai's side. This was their insistence. It was precisely because of this that Jiang Hai brought them here and not Moses Adams. After the girls entered the room, Jiang Hai also took out the things he had prepared for himself. Most of the things in front were the same as last time, but in addition, Jiang Hai also brought a lot of bags, a very long rope with metal wires inside, and a big bottle of oxygen. If someone was here, they would be very surprised. It's understandable to bring bags, after all, they have to carry things. But the oxygen tank and the rope were a bit puzzling. But obviously, Jiang Hai didn't want to explain to the narrator, so he just carried these things and walked out of the cabin. After looking around and seeing that there were no other boats, Jiang Hai fastened one end of the rope to the boat with a metal buckle, then he jumped into the sea with the rope and the big pile of things. Hearing the splashing sound of Jiang Hai jumping into the sea, Aphrodite and the others were worried, but just like what Jiang Hai said, they didn't come out and continued to stay in the room. This time, Jiang Hai didn't use the underwater engine because there was really no need for it, because the oxygen tank on his body was enough to make him sink. Once in the sea, Jiang Hai quickly sank down with the rope. The sea had buoyancy, but this buoyancy could only slow down Jiang Hai's speed. More than 1,000 meters, Jiang Hai was already familiar with it. Anyway, Jiang Hai ignored the water pressure, he didn't care about the diving speed, and he didn't need to breathe. After entering the water, his diving speed was still very fast. A few minutes passed in the blink of an eye and Jiang Hai had already dived to a depth of a few hundred meters. He needed to be careful here. Although he ignored the water pressure, he still needed to be careful in the deep sea. If there was a giant squid or something like that, he would be able to react. Fortunately, he didn't encounter such an unlucky thing. Soon, Jiang Hai arrived right above the sunken ship he saw last time. He glanced at the cliffs on both sides, they were still covered with giant deep-sea lice. This time, Jiang Hai was much calmer, he knew that these things were harmless. Although they still looked a little disgusting, he still swung over lightly and climbed onto the ship from the cliff. The rope was also fastened to the ship by Jiang Hai with a metal buckle. After making sure that the rope was fixed, Jiang Hai left the oxygen tank here. He held two weapons in his hands and moved towards the cabin. He looked as careful as before. In a place like this, there was always nothing wrong with being careful. Although the last time he came here was only a few days ago, in the past few days, perhaps because of Jiang Hai's intrusion, there were a lot of sea creatures in this cabin. However, these sea creatures didn't pose any threat to Jiang Hai except for their ugly appearance. While gently moving towards the third floor, Jiang Hai lightly bypassed these creatures. Not long after, Jiang Hai had already arrived at the two warehouses on the third floor. The squid that was originally pinned to the wall by Jiang Hai had disappeared, but Jiang Hai's arrow was still there. He didn't know whether the squid escaped or was eaten clean by these deep-sea fishes. Anyway, this had nothing to do with Jiang Hai. He came here to make money. First, he used his cane to gently pick up the gems. Jiang Hai was afraid that there would be creatures in this pile of treasures. Fortunately, there were no animals here. With this thought, Jiang Hai gently picked up the gems. There were no other things inside except for the gems. Then Jiang Hai began to pick them up. Now he didn't classify them, but directly put them in his bag. Not long after, a black bag was full. Jiang Hai didn't continue to put it in because his bag was originally very big. If this bag was placed on the shore, it would weigh more than 200 pounds, and it wouldn't be light underwater because of its buoyancy. More than 200 pounds wasn't a big problem for Jiang Hai, who was twice the limit of human fitness. However, the strength of this ship was limited, so Jiang Hai just put this bag and returned to the deck. At this time, the oxygen tank came in handy. Jiang Hai took out another bag and tied it to the other side of the bag. At the same time, he tied the bag to the rope. Then he began to inject oxygen into the sealed bag. When a certain amount of oxygen was injected, the bag was tied tightly. Then the balloon made by Jiang Hai carried the bag of more than 200 pounds of gems along the rope fixed by Jiang Hai and slowly floated to the sea surface. After confirming that there was no problem with the bag, Jiang Hai returned to the cabin and began to put other things in. This was Jiang Hai's method. Although it seemed a bit stupid, it was a good method. Jiang Hai didn't have any special ability to command the creatures in the deep sea to serve him, so he could only think of a stupid way to send these things up. Although there was some risk in doing so, the risk was still within Jiang Hai's acceptable range. Then he returned to the cabin again and put another bag on the plate armor. Jiang Hai planned to take away all the gold, silver, and jewelry in the warehouse. When Jiang Hai first looked at it, he felt that there was about a ton of them. But when he packed it up, he realized that he had underestimated the warehouse. It was almost filled to the brim with more than a ton of treasures. Fortunately, Jiang Hai had prepared enough. Jiang Hai's big bag filled 14 bags before he could take away all these things. According to the calculation of 200 pounds per bag, or 100 kilograms per bag, 14 bags meant a total of 1,400 kilograms. In total, it weighed 1.5 tons. Moreover, Jiang Hai would pack more every time, 200 pounds more and no less. Last time, Jiang Hai brought back more than 8 kilograms of gems, which were sold for more than $2 million. Of course, these gems were sold by the kilograms, not by the kilograms, but that didn't stop Jiang Hai from calculating. 1,500 kilograms. According to the calculation that 10 kilograms could be sold for $3 million, these gems were worth a total of $450 million. Of course, there would be some discount because there were a lot of gold coins above, but most of the money below was silver coins. But if he sold it, at least half the price would be, which was more than $200 million. Thinking of this, the corners of Jiang Hai's mouth unconsciously opened again. Who would complain about having too much money? At least he wouldn't. From 8:00 in the evening, when the sky was completely dark, Jiang Hai began to get busy. Unknowingly, he was busy until 2:00 in the morning. At this time, the treasures in the warehouse had been moved to the surface of the sea by Jiang Hai. Next was the armor in the last warehouse. Jiang Hai reorganized his equipment and walked to another room. But when he opened the door of the warehouse, a creature appeared in front of Jiang Hai's eyes. Shark, shark. Looking at the guy in front of him who was wandering back and forth in this small room at this time, Jiang Hai couldn't help but roar subconsciously. Of course, his voice couldn't be heard at the bottom of the sea, but the movement of the water here also startled the shark. Its big head turned, and a pair of emotionless eyes were already staring at Jiang Hai. At this time, there was only one kind of shark here, the six-jaw shark, a common shark in the deep sea. It was a creature that had just been discovered by humans recently. It had evolved to its current form 200 million years ago and had lived for 200 million years. It was definitely a living creature. Jiang Hai had already checked this creature before coming. Its main food was squid, cephalopods, shrimp, crabs, and other crustaceans, all kinds of fish and marine mammals. Unless it was provoked, it usually wouldn't attack humans. Great white sharks usually wouldn't take the initiative to attack humans, but how many chances of survival were there when encountering a great white shark in the sea? Unless it was provoked? I wondered if being hungry counts as being enraged. This six-jawed shark was about 5 meters long. How did it enter this small cabin? Jiang Hai was not clear about it. But Jiang Hai knew very well that this shark didn't look friendly and was even full of malice. At the moment when their eyes met, Jiang Hai was surprised, but for this shark, it was a surprise. Chapter 303. Who? Although no sound could be heard underwater, the sound of water flowing when the shark swung its tail still entered Jiang Hai's ears. Then the shark rushed straight towards Jiang Hai like an arrow, as if it really saw its prey. Its bloody mouth full of sharp teeth also opened at this time. Looking at the shark rushing in front of him, Jiang Hai panicked, but he didn't lose his mind. He already knew how to deal with sharks before he came down. If he encountered a 10-meter-long great white shark, a 10-meter-long deep-sea squid, a 10-meter-long sperm whale, or a killer whale, Jiang Hai may not have many ways to deal with it. But a 5-meter-long shark? Well, Jiang Hai did not have many ways to deal with it, but maybe because of the dragon tattoo on his body, Jiang Hai was particularly calm at this critical moment. According to what he learned on the internet, Jiang Hai directly punched out. The huge force even caused a bubble to form in the airless deep sea. The powerful force, coupled with the black net around the fist, directly hit the shark's nose. When attacked by a shark, there are two weaknesses of a shark. One is its nose, because a shark's nose is the most sensitive object in the world, hundreds of times more flexible than a dog's nose. A 1-meter-long shark can monitor the sea area within a few kilometers. It is precisely because of this that a shark's nose has a lot of nerve endings. It is very sensitive but also very fragile. So if you are bitten by a shark, hit its nose. There is a lot of chance that it will let go. Another weakness is its eyes. Sharks have no eyelids, only eyelids, so its eyes are very easy to destroy. So when attacked by a shark, hitting its eyes is also a good choice. Of course, in addition to this, sharks have another weakness, its gills. In the diet of sharks, the most important thing is sea turtles. When a sea turtle faces a shark, its main target is its gills. As long as it bites the shark's gills, the shark will be finished. But for humans, this weakness isn't very good. But even if the cheeks were wrong, the nose and eyes were definitely correct. Jiang Hai went up and punched him. The heavy blow landed on the shark's nose. In an instant, the shark went crazy. It swung its head and wanted to swim away. However, was Jiang Hai that easy to talk to? At this time, his other hand had already reacted and readied the spear gun. As Jiang Hai pulled the trigger, a sharp arrow instantly penetrated the body of the six-jaw shark. Peng peng. However, Jiang Hai's technique was not very good in a hurry. This arrow was slightly off target and only pierced the abdomen of the six-maned shark. Blood instantly flowed out, and the shark also struggled hard. But no matter how hard it struggled, it couldn't get the arrow out. The arrow of a spear gun was used to catch whales, so it was full of barbs. It was impossible for the shark to get it out on its own. The crazy shark kept hitting the deck of the boat with its body. For a while, the whole boat was shaking. This startled Jiang Hai. One must know that if the boat fell, then he would be fine, and the treasures could be ignored for the time being. But don't forget, this boat was tied to his yacht, and there were also 10 girls on it. Jiang Hai didn't bring them out to hide at the bottom of the sea. Looking at the crazy shark, Jiang Hai, who had already dodged to the side, had to grit his teeth. If he didn't kill this shark at this time, he would be the one who died. Immediately, he pulled out another spear gun. Jiang Hai loaded it in an instant and shot again. This time, Jiang Hai shot directly from the left rib of the shark and pierced the shark. Although 2 of the shark's vital points were damaged, the shark was not dead yet. It was still struggling there. Seeing this scene, Jiang Hai didn't have the leisure and time to care about it. He took a step and instantly came in front of the shark. At the same time, he also took out the pistol that had been behind him. The shark saw Jiang Hai in front of it. Although it was difficult for it to understand what mutual destruction meant, it was because of this reason. So, it also opened its big mouth and bit Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai looked at its big mouth and didn't retreat. Instead, he moved forward. One of his hands directly reached into the shark's mouth. When the shark's big mouth bit down, Jiang Hai's arm, which was wearing a stab vest, felt a sharp pain. Fortunately, the shark's bite was not strong enough. It didn't bite through Jiang Hai's clothes. Jiang Hai had already entered the shark's weak point. With a pistol in his hand, Jiang Hai was in the shark's mouth. He aimed at the shark's brain and pulled the trigger. Bang 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 bang. With 5 consecutive shots, Jiang Hai had already fired all the bullets of the underwater pistol. After eating these 5 bullets, the shark's body finally couldn't bear it anymore. Its body unconsciously turned over and sank down with thick blood. Feeling that the shark was dead, Jiang Hai couldn't help but breathe a long sigh of relief. Bang! But just as Jiang Hai breathed a sigh of relief, the shark's body fell to the ground. The huge impact made the boat that was about to turn over because of the shark, and the tilting strength increased again. Not good. Feeling the direction of the boat, Jiang Hai couldn't help but mutter with a headache. He instantly opened the chest containing the armor beside him. Fortunately, the armor wasn't damaged in this incident. Then, he directly drilled through the hole in the ship's warehouse and out of the ship. Looking outside the boat, Jiang Hai found that the boat that was originally stuck here had tilted to 45 degrees and seemed to be continuing to tilt forward. If this continued, the boat would probably sink to the bottom of the sea in an instant. Now it was a race against time. If the boat really collapsed, then his small yacht would probably be pulled down by the boat in an instant. At this time, Aphrodite and the others on the sea were also very surprised because the boat kept tilting to one side, which surprised them. But thinking of Jiang Hai's words, they didn't leave the room. They just prayed that Jiang Hai would come back soon. If Jiang Hai knew that his orders would put these girls in danger, he would rather not bring these girls here. But it was too late to say this now. What Jiang Hai needed to do the most now was to untie or break the rope. Seeing this, Jiang Hai had a rare motivation and his body suddenly swam faster. In a few strokes, he had already reached the plate armor of the tilted boat. Looking at the rope in front of him, Jiang Hai immediately pulled out the dagger he had been carrying and cut the rope in front of him. But after cutting a few times, Jiang Hai found that he was a little too naive. Because he was afraid that the rope would break, Jiang Hai specially bought the thickest rope with steel wires inside. It was impossible to cut this kind of rope with a dagger in less than 10 minutes. But now, let alone 10 minutes, it might not even last a minute. Just as Jiang Hai was a little worried, he suddenly saw the piece of wood tied to the rope. I'm so stupid. Compared to the rope, this piece of wood that had been soaked in the sea for nearly 400 years was naturally easier to deal with. Jiang Hai went up without saying anything and directly kicked it. Just as Jiang Hai thought, perhaps this piece of wood was extremely strong 400 years ago, but now it was very difficult to withstand Jiang Hai's kick. In an instant, the wood on one side of the boat broke. Then Jiang Hai exerted force and pulled the rope to the other side. With a kacha sound, the wood that was originally tied to the rope was kicked into two pieces by Jiang Hai. At this moment, the two sides of the trench could no longer bear the weight of the boat. It tilted to the left and fell into the deepest part of the trench. Jiang Hai's oxygen tank, spear, and so on also fell down like this. Although he was a little emotional, Jiang Hai finally solved this problem. This made him, who was holding the rope, couldn't help but let out a long sigh. Then he tied the armor in his hand to his body and threw the remaining wood into the sea. Then Jiang Hai used his arms to climb forward. A distance of more than 1,000 meters, if it was on land, Jiang Hai could easily climb, but it was easier to climb in the sea because of the buoyancy. It took a few minutes to go down, but it took less time to come up. After about 5 or 6 minutes of climbing, Jiang Hai's headlight had already shone on the bottom of his yacht. There were many huge bags around his yacht. Looking at these things, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be happy. This time, he made a lot of money. Puff! With a splash, Jiang Hai finally emerged from the bottom of the sea. Although this deep-sea adventure had a lot of gains, it also scared Jiang Hai. First of all, he almost caused the people on the boat to fall into the sea. Secondly, there was the problem of the shark. If Jiang Hai wasn't lucky, he might have died in the deep sea this time. Although the treasure was good, sometimes you have to pay attention to it to see if you can live to spend it. Bang! Returning to the boat, Jiang Hai first sat on the deck and rested for half a day. These few hours also tired him out. The physical tiredness was secondary, the mental tiredness was really very tiring. After about half an hour, Jiang Hai sat up from the ground again. He first threw the armor back to his room, then changed into a new set of clothes and called Aphrodite and the others. The boat shook so much just now, is it okay? As soon as the door opened, Aphrodite looked at Jiang Hai and asked anxiously. It's okay, I made you worry, but now, it's time for us to harvest. Hearing Aphrodite's words, Jiang Hai smiled a little embarrassedly, but then looked at her seriously. Now is indeed the time for harvest. Chapter 304. Heavens, heavens, these things, how do we get them? Looking at the gold, silver, and jewelry on the bed, Aphrodite and the others were clearly in a daze. Many of them covered their small mouths. They knew that these things were very valuable. The treasures on Jiang Hai's bed were at least priceless. Although they were a little curious about where Jiang Hai got these things, they didn't ask. This was because they trusted Jiang Hai 100%, even if these things were snatched by Jiang Hai. Therefore, other than being surprised, Aphrodite asked Jiang Hai what to do now. Put these things separately. Put the coins of this color into this box, 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 and the other things into this box. Clapping his hands and throwing the last bag of jewelry to the side, Jiang Hai looked at the things in front of him and said slowly. To be honest, there were a lot of things, but the style was basically the same. Gold coins, silver coins, broken gems, pearl necklaces, and some decorations. For example, a belt made of pure gold with a few gems embedded in it, or a knife with a golden handle with a gem embedded in the handle. But after all, these things were still relatively rare. Because to be honest, gold and silver were not very suitable for making equipment apart from being used as decorations and gold and silver coins. This was because the texture of these things was too soft. For example, in some ancient movies, in order to distinguish whether the silver and gold were fake or not, people would often bite them. Even a person's teeth could be bitten, not to mention if they were on the battlefield. Wouldn't the other party's knife, spear, or whatever pierce through them? Therefore, there weren't too many of these decorations. Instead, the most of them were hard currency, gold coins. Okay. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, everyone regained their senses and began to put these things into the 5 boxes that Jiang Hai had placed. Needless to say, gold and silver coins were the most abundant, but they were also the least valuable. After all, it was mass-produced. It would be strange if it was valuable. On the other hand, after the artificial cultivation of pearls, pearls were not too valuable. Now, there were only 2 kinds of pearls that were more valuable internationally, gold pearls and black pearls. These 2 kinds of pearls were really very expensive, but white pearls, if they were not big enough, were rarely valuable. As for large pearls, Jiang Hai only had a few dozen of them. If he sold them at the price of pearls, then Jiang Hai would suffer a huge loss. But if he sold them at the price of antiques, then they wouldn't be as valuable as gems next to them. Jiang Hai didn't care too much about these pearls. Since they were barely on par with the gold coins, Jiang Hai didn't care much about them. It was said that there was strength in numbers, but the premise was that there were not many things. Obviously, Jiang Hai had a lot of things. When Jiang Hai floated up, it was around 3:00 in the morning. It was already 4 o'clock when they started to pack. The 13 people worked together. By the time they finished packing everything, it was already past 11:00. They originally thought that they could finish before 8 o'clock, but it seemed that Jiang Hai was thinking too much. When they finally finished packing everything into the boxes, Aphrodite and the others couldn't help but stretch. Jiang Hai, who hadn't slept all night, also couldn't help but relax a little. Come, each of you pick one. This is your salary. You're not allowed to refuse. Looking at these hard-working girls in front of him, Jiang Hai couldn't give them what they wanted most, but some material rewards were indispensable. He remembered that the last time he appraised them, they said that any of the gems here was worth tens of thousands of dollars. Jiang Hai didn't feel distressed about giving them away. After all, these girls were completely trustworthy. The most important thing was that he almost implicated these girls and made them hide at the bottom of the sea. If he didn't give these girls some things, he wouldn't be able to live with himself. No need. You can take us out to play. We'll be very happy. After listening to Jiang Hai's words, Dana Taylor waved her hand immediately. As she said, Jiang Hai brought them to Miami and provided food, accommodation, and entertainment. This was enough. Helping Jiang Hai complete some work was what they should do as employees. What's more, their hearts were still tied to Jiang Hai. How could they ask Jiang Hai for these things? Hey, I said, this is your salary. You earned it with your labor. One for each of you. If you don't want it, I'll help you choose. Looking at these girls in front of him, Jiang Hai shook his head. If he didn't give it to them, he would feel uncomfortable in his heart. If that's the case, then we'll take it. Anyway, Jiang Hai has so many. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Aphrodite hesitated and smiled at Jiang Hai. Her beautiful face was reflected in the sunlight in front of Jiang Hai's eyes. It was really beautiful. Feeling Jiang Hai's gaze, Aphrodite couldn't help but lower her head shyly, and Jiang Hai also reacted. He looked at the people in front of him and said, "Listen, your elder sister said so. Come on, take one each. Pick the good-looking one and take the big one." Seeing that Jiang Hai said so and deliberately picked a big one and stuffed it into the hands of the youngest, Yana's Joy, everyone was no longer hesitant. Indeed, Jiang Hai had a lot of gems here. Not to say that there were tens of thousands, but at least thousands. It was not too much to just pick one. So after thinking for a while, Dana took a pink gem. Hilda also deliberately picked a yellow gem. This gem was very valuable in the East. After all, not everyone could use yellow in the East. Basically, such yellow gems had to be related to the royal family. And once it was related to the royal family, this transparent yellow gem the size of a pigeon's egg was worth at least a few million. It was at least more valuable than Jiang Hai's pair of porcelain bottles. But in the West, yellow gems were just yellow gems and didn't count for much. After the two sisters picked their gems, the other girls also picked one that they liked. As for Yana's joy, she didn't want the biggest one that Jiang Hai gave her. Instead, she picked a red gem of the same size. This gem was very red and very beautiful. Soon, each of them had one piece. Even Daliana and Marian, who came here to help them after waking up, were playing with one piece each. As for women, no matter their age, they were like crows who couldn't resist these sparkling things. In the end, Jiang Hai deliberately chose a red gem that was somewhat heart-shaped for Aphrodite before putting the box away. This time, the sleepy faces of the girls changed completely. Everyone has worked hard. Now let's go make some food and then go back to sleep after eating. We will return at night. After clapping his hands to attract everyone's attention, Jiang Hai said to the girls in front of him. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the girls raised their hands in agreement. They were indeed a little too tired. Then Jiang Hai and the others went to the kitchen and made some simple seafood porridge. They also stewed a pot of beef as a side dish. The meal was very delicious. After eating all of it, they went back to sleep. Jiang Hai also checked his things and was ready to go to sleep. All he could do was to have a rough idea in his heart. As for the specific situation, he would let Philip's people worry about it. After sleeping until 4:00 in the afternoon, Jiang Hai woke up in a daze. He called Moses Adams and asked him to inform Phillips to receive this batch of things. At the same time, he started the yacht and prepared to return. After the auction this time, Jiang Hai was not going to go back by plane, but he was going to drive this thing back. He bought a yacht. He can't just leave it here. Moreover, in Jiang Hai's view, such things are inevitable in the future. Don't forget, he still has a lot of sea maps in his hands. Don't forget, he still has a lot of sea maps. After getting a call from Jiang Hai, he, who was sleeping comfortably in the hotel, also jumped up for the first time. He patted the back of the hotel's special service girl next to him, put on his clothes, and drove the tired girl out. Then, he called Phillips's people. After receiving the call, Phillips's people didn't dare to be careless. Whether it was the jewelry worth hundreds of millions of dollars that Jiang Hai said this time, or the armor, these things were extremely precious to Phillips. Therefore, a large number of security vehicles and even helicopters were sent to quickly rush to the small dock in the port of Miami. For safety's sake, they even purposely separated a section to prevent ordinary people from entering. The staff of the dock could ignore other people, but they still had to respect Phillips. This was because they had cooperated with Phillips before. For example, when some rich people went bankrupt, their yachts parked here would naturally be used to pay off their debts. At this time, Phillips said that he would seal off a small section of the road, so naturally, there was no problem. But when the person in charge here saw that Jiang Hai's yacht was the target of these people, he couldn't help but be a little surprised. Because the person in charge here was Jennifer's boss. Someone had already told him about Jiang Hai's yacht the day before yesterday. Unexpectedly, the person who robbed the yacht of a rich man from the Middle East had the power to make Philip stand up for him. Everything is inside, be careful when you take it. As the boat docked, Jiang Hai also threw the rope on the dock. After fixing the position of the boat, Jiang Hai jumped off the boat. Looking at the person in charge of Phillips, he didn't know whether he was of Latin American or Middle Eastern descent, Jiang Hai said lightly. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the man's eyes suddenly lit up. Then he sent people to board the boat. Under the command of Aphrodite and others, the 5 boxes in Jiang Hai's room were carried out. Chapter 305. Are there only a few of you here? Can't you find more people to come over? It's almost midnight. Jiang Hai glanced at his watch, then looked at Aphrodite and the others who didn't sleep last night and couldn't stand it tonight. Hearing his words, the person in charge opposite him couldn't help but smile awkwardly. Since Jiang Hai's ship arrived at the dock, Jiang Hai took these things and boarded the escort car arranged by Phillips. Of course, Moses Adams, who has been waiting here for a long time, was also in the car. The group soon arrived at Phillips' office in Miami, and then the experts prepared by the person in charge came in handy. Unfortunately, he underestimated Jiang Hai's treasures. He only prepared 6 experts, and it takes more than 10 minutes or even more than half an hour for each expert to appraise the authenticity of an item. After all, these things are very valuable. If one of them makes a mistake, they will be the ones to suffer a loss. So they have to deal with it carefully. Jiang Hai and the others arrived here at 7:00 in the evening. Until now, it's already past 2:00 in the middle of the night, and these people have only counted about half of the things. The other half of the things haven't been touched yet, especially the most important one, the set of armor. He hasn't slept for almost 2 consecutive days. With Jiang Hai's physique, although it's not to the extent that he can't stand it, it's inevitable that he's sleepy. He couldn't help but yawn and helplessly said to the person in charge in front of him, "I'll deal with it right away." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, although the person in charge complained in his heart that Jiang Hai brought so many things here, he wouldn't say so. After all, these things can generate wealth for the auction house. Although that set of armor is a big deal, in fact, the money that can be earned from the auction of that set of armor is not too much. The only thing they could ask for was the commission after the auction. However, in order to win over Jiang Hai, a big customer, the original 10% commission had been reduced to 3%. 100 million would only earn them 3 million, and 1 billion would only earn them 30 million. It was really not much. They were more interested in earning money to advertise themselves. However, if he were to sell these jewels, gold, and silver coins, it would be real money. The price they offered Jiang Hai was very high, but no matter how high it was, they still made a profit. Even if they made $100 for each gold coin, $10 for each silver coin, and $1,000 for each gemstone, this large amount of jewelry was enough to make them hundreds of millions. Therefore, compared to the armor, they had no choice but to be more careful with it. However, as Jiang Hai had said, the progress of 6 people handling such a large pile of jewelry was indeed too slow. Not to mention whether they could handle it, it was also very tiring for him to wait here. Therefore, after thinking for a while, he went out and found a group of clerks. These people were the staff of Phillips's office in Miami. Their main purpose was to help with the appraisal. Of course, they would not touch the precious jewels and gold coins, but they could help with the ordinary silver coins. For this purpose, he specially asked them to change into a set of clothes without pockets before he came over and started to work. After distributing the largest amount of silver coins, the rest of the people appraised the valuable items, which was indeed a lot faster. At 5:00 in the morning, all the gold and silver coins were appraised. This time, Jiang Hai got a total of 27,665 gold coins and 86,742 silver coins. Of course, these gold and silver coins were not all from Spain. In fact, the currency in Europe had always been very chaotic. There was no clear currency, especially in the Middle Ages of Europe. From the 14th to the 16th century, the currency in Europe was quite chaotic. Europe was already in a mess, let alone the American continent, which was colonized by them. At the beginning of the 14th century, the lords of Shenluo imitated the Rho groschen coin and made the groschen coin, which was a hard currency at that time. But then, France issued gold coins twice, both of which failed. It was not until the standard gold coin of France appeared that the currency stabilized and was used until the era of Louis XIV. Then, in 1344, England issued a noble gold coin, which weighed about 8,972 grams and was worth 6 shillings and 8 pence, which was equivalent to half a mark, gold, and 1/3 of a pound, silver, but it was not very popular. The Lords of the Rhine unified the standard of imitating the Rho groschen coin and called it the Rhine shield, but the shield was very light. At first, it only weighed 23 carats. 23 carats was not a gram. Otherwise, if a diamond had a dozen carats equal to a dozen grams, it would be a big deal. Conversion units were 5 carats equal to 1 gram. The Rhine shield was 23 grams and half a carat in the early stage, and 19 carats in the later stage. Converted to grams, it was about 4 grams. For pirates, such a large amount of gold coins was really not enough. In addition to the Spanish gold coins, Jiang Hai had the most gold coins from the golden Egyptian and English nobles. Basically, each of them weighed nearly 10 grams. Only these gold coins were valuable enough. Although they were not all Spanish gold coins, they were of about the same age and weight, so their value was naturally not much different. According to the orders of the auction house's leader, the person in charge was still according to the price of the last transaction. One gold coin was $1,000, and one silver coin was $350. In total, there were more than 110,000 gold coins. 1 ton of gold and silver coins was worth $58,024,700. More than $50 million was not a lot, but it was very much in line with Jiang Hai's requirements. At least as soon as the money came out, his savings rose again. And most importantly, the gems had not been identified yet. With the money as a foundation, Jiang Hai felt a lot better. Unknowingly, the sun in Miami shone on this land. It was not until 9:00 in the morning that Aphrodite and the others, who had already fallen asleep, finally got up and moved their sore bodies. Finally, the last gem had been identified. The appraiser over there handed the forms to the person in charge. The person in charge did a rough calculation and then looked at Jiang Hai with some surprise. "What's wrong? Is there something wrong?" Jiang Hai leaned on the sofa and looked at the person in charge in front of him. "Of course not, everything is right, but this is really a lot of money." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the person in charge here shook his head, walked in front of Jiang Hai, and handed the 6 forms to Jiang Hai. These 6 tables were made by the 6 people. Every time they finished looking at an item, they would record a string of numbers on it. This was their estimate. Basically, the auction house wouldn't make a loss, so they would calculate and buy according to the price on the table. Although they didn't know where Jiang Hai got these things from, it didn't prevent them from collecting these things. After taking the forms in front of him, Jiang Hai also looked at them. When he saw the first form, he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. 1 pigeon blood ruby, net weight 41. 5 carats, estimated age between 1600 to 1650. Other items, none, just a necklace pendant, estimated price, $183,350 to $192,275. 1 golden green cat's eye, net weight 37. 84 carats, estimated age 1600 to 1650. Other items, a string of natural pearl lotus, estimated price, $156,700 to $158,900. Looking at the numbers above these things, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be happy. Not only were there rubies, emeralds, sapphires, topaz, but there were also many cat's eyes, golden green gemstones, and so on. There were even ivory and coral products. Jiang Hai didn't know much about these, but he understood the estimated price at the back. Even if they were all calculated according to the lowest price, he would still make a profit this time. The 6 forms were about the same, and Jiang Hai also calculated the price of these things in his heart. This made his heart skip a beat. Sure enough, for a pirate ship like this, gold and silver coins were just a small part. The real value was these jewelry. For these jewelry, I won't quote you according to the lowest price. Let's take a round number. The gold and silver coins here are 58 million. My final price for these jewelry is 242 million. Let's make it 300 million. What do you think? Seeing Jiang Hai put down the things in his hand with satisfaction, the person in charge here hesitated and reported the price of this batch of jewelry to Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai knew that if he auctioned this batch of jewelry, he could at least sell it for 100 million or even more. But there was a problem, and that was the problem of paying taxes. Also, if he wanted to sell these jewels, he would have to pay some commission. Counting all the money, he could probably get 200 million yuan in his hands. Now that he could get 300 million yuan, it was pretty good. No problem, deal. After calculating in his heart, Jiang Hai also looked at Moses Adams next to him. After Moses Adams saw Jiang Hai's gaze, he handed over his mobile phone. There was a string of numbers on it. This was the price he estimated. 280 million, this was Moses Adams's estimate. It was 20 million less than this price. This proved that the other party didn't lie to him this time. Moses Adams really didn't sleep for a second tonight. He had been staring at these jewelry. From time to time, he took photos and sent them to the antique dealers he knew to estimate the price. Although it was not very proper to do this, this was the United States. It was not uncommon for Phillips to do this. He didn't sleep all night, but now he was in good spirits because he was already prepared. After all, he just got up yesterday afternoon. Even if he stared at it all night, his eyes were just a little red now. Chapter 306. It's indeed a pleasure to work with you. Seeing that Jiang Hai had agreed, the person in charge didn't hesitate. It was indeed very refreshing to work with Jiang Hai. From the bottom of his heart, Jiang Hai wasn't the kind of person who would hesitate over $10,000 or $100,000. If you asked him to spend the money on some strangers, he might not be happy, but it didn't matter now. After all, the two of them still had a big show that hadn't started yet. The armor was worth much more than the 300 million. When the two of them shook hands, a secretary had already drafted a document. After Moses Adams looked at it and confirmed that there were no problems, Jiang Hai signed his name on it. After Phillips's person in charge signed his name and stamped it with Phillips's seal, Jiang Hai's effect this time was considered complete. Phillips had bought Jiang Hai's jewelry for $300 million in private. Because it was a private purchase, there was no need to file tax returns, so Jiang Hai received the full amount. Of course, if Jiang Hai wanted others to know and file tax returns, the tax bureau wouldn't refuse. It was similar to private transactions in China, except that the amount was a little too big. After the jewelry was sorted and taken away, Jiang Hai's phone vibrated. His Centurion card had an extra balance of more than 20 million, and now there was an extra $321 million. This was Jiang Hai's current net worth. As the saying goes, if you have money at home, you won't panic. Jiang Hai had money in his pocket now, so he didn't panic. After keeping the phone, all that was left was the question about the armor. Jiang Hai authorized Phillips to auction it. After the auction, Phillips would take 3% of the money as commission. In addition, he would have to pay 35% of the tax. Originally, he would also have to pay state taxes, but Florida had an advantage. There was no income tax. If it was auctioned in New York, Jiang Hai would have to pay 15% more. Now that the 15% had been saved, it was good news that could not be discounted. In other words, apart from the commission and tax, Jiang Hai would get 62% of the profits from the armor. Although 1/3 was taken away, Jiang Hai's heart was still surging. After all, this was his chance to make the most money. After all, the experts estimated that the armor was worth $1 billion. This was only the lowest price, and it would definitely go up. Even if it was $1 billion, Jiang Hai would get more than $600 million. This was undeniably good news for him. After signing the entrustment agreement, Phillips began to prepare for publicity. The armor's auction would take place in a week. According to Phillips's words, such armor should at least be auctioned in the spring auction. The auction house was similar to the Fashion Week, but the Fashion Week was divided into 4 seasons. However, the auction house only had one season, which was the spring auction. They would save a year's worth of good goods and then auction them in the spring auction. Unfortunately, Jiang Hai couldn't wait that long. Therefore, they could only advertise for a week and then auction it directly. Although it was a pity, it wasn't difficult to tell rich people that they had good things in this era. After everything was settled, Jiang Hai and the others also left Phillips's office. Although everyone was a little sleepy, they were very excited after knowing that Jiang Hai had made a lot of money. Looking at the sunlight outside, Jiang Hai took out his phone and casually pressed a few buttons. Behind him, Moses Adams' phone rang. He took out his phone and saw that his balance was 2 million. Seeing this, Moses Adams couldn't help but look at Jiang Hai excitedly. This was a lot of money. This is the money I'm giving you this time. Do your best. Seeing Moses Adams looking over, Jiang Hai smiled. He had just made 300 million, and there was a bigger sum of money waiting for him. 2 million was actually not a lot. After all, he still had a lot of things to trouble Moses Adams. Moses Adams might seem to be having fun here all day long, but he was really busy. But in fact, he was really busy. Jiang Hai knew that this guy was definitely one of the top lawyers in Boston. There were countless cases that needed his help every day. The reason why he rushed over because of his phone call was that he wanted to curry favor with him, and also because they were closer. For such a friend, Jiang Hai was never stingy. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Moses Adams put his phone away. He didn't refuse Jiang Hai. Besides, in this world, there was no one who could refuse $2 million. Although he had a good relationship with Jiang Hai, work was work, and it couldn't be mixed with private matters. Looking at his smile, Jiang Hai also smiled. It was fine as long as the two understood in their hearts. They didn't need to say it out loud. Where are we going now? Seeing that Jiang Hai and Moses Adams had finished talking, Marian came over and tugged at Jiang Hai's clothes and asked curiously. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but roll his eyes at her. Go back to sleep. You haven't slept well for 2 days. Aren't you tired? Patting Marian's little head, Jiang Hai said with a smile. We're going back now? I was thinking that since we have nothing to do today, let's go to Disney. You promised us to go. Looking at Jiang Hai, Marian curled her lips helplessly. Compared to going out to play and going back to sleep, going to the amusement park was more in line with the mentality of a girl of her age. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but laugh. What's the hurry? We still have at least a week to stay here. We can go at any time these days. Orlando isn't far from here. Jiang Hai was telling the truth. Orlando was only more than 300 kilometers away from Miami. It was only a 3-hour drive. It wasn't very far, so Jiang Hai and the others were really not in a hurry. Okay then. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Marian was indeed a little sleepy. Seeing that Jiang Hai hadn't forgotten the agreement between them, she was relieved and couldn't help but yawn. Then, shall we go now? Seeing that Jiang Hai said that he wanted to go back to sleep, Aphrodite and the others didn't have as much energy as Daliana and Marian. They didn't rest well for 2 days in a row and they were a little tired. No, let's eat something first before going back. I'm tired of the hotel's buffet. Let's change to something else. Jiang Hai and the others had been eating breakfast and dinner in the hotel these days, except for occasionally going out for lunch. Although the hotel's buffet is good, to be honest, the taste is not very good. It's okay to eat it once, but to let a picky guy like Jiang Hai eat it every day, he can't eat it anymore. After saying this, Jiang Hai swept around. After all, it was still morning and it was not good to eat too much oil, so he was going to find some street snacks. He only saw that at this time, in front of an intersection on the street, there was a food car parked there. A Latin American woman was busy there with her husband and 2 children. Jiang Hai's eyesight was quite good. Although far away, Jiang Hai saw a lot of delicious food on the car. In addition to the most famous tacos here, there were also hot dogs and hamburgers. Seeing these things, Jiang Hai couldn't help but feel a little hungry. He said to Aphrodite and the others beside him, "You go get the car, I'll go buy something." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the others nodded, yawned and were about to leave, but Aphrodite was not in a hurry to leave. After hesitating for a moment, she said to Jiang Hai, "Let me go with you. There are so many servings, it's not easy for you to carry." Hearing her words, Jiang Hai thought for a moment and nodded. Indeed, it was impossible for him to only buy his own. There were a total of 12 people here. Even if each person bought 2 servings, there would be a total of 24 servings. It was indeed a bit too much. It was not bad to have someone to help him get it. Jiang Hai took Aphrodite to the stall. Seeing that there were guests, the man who was making pancakes couldn't help but raise his head, curl his tongue, and said with an excited face, "Welcome, what do you want to eat? Our pancakes here are absolutely the best. The sauce we use is imported from Mexico." Hearing the man's words, Jiang Hai also nodded. Indeed, the sauce used by these people has a Mexican logo on it. It doesn't look like the kind bought in the supermarket here. Jiang Hai really hasn't eaten such authentic burritos before. "We want a total of 24 burritos. You have to make it faster." Hearing the words of the man in front of him, Jiang Hai couldn't help but say, "Okay." Hearing that Jiang Hai wanted so much, the man couldn't help but smile. This is a big job. Burritos, also known as tacos, are a traditional food in Mexico. They use a tortilla to stuff meat, vegetables, and so on. It's similar to hot dogs, but hot dogs use bread and burritos use tortillas. This tortilla is similar to the pancakes often eaten in the north of the country, but it is crisper than that kind of pancake. If there is a comparison, there is a kind of pancake fruit. This kind of pancake fruit is called mixed grain pancake. It has a thin layer and is very crispy. It's similar to this burrito, so these burritos are delicious and freshly made. Picking up a spoon, the man immediately picked up the pancake, and the woman helped to chop the filling. The stuffing in this thing is also very particular, and the variety and quantity are not ordinary. According to what everyone likes to eat, the stuffing is different, and of course, the price is different. Chapter 307. The store really had everything. You could put beef patties, fried chicken fillets, fried meat slices, turkey slices, hot dog sausages, and stewed pork. Apart from that, there were also a lot of vegetables, lettuce, zucchini, celery, corn kernels, kale, onions, and even fried potato sticks. According to the price, one meat dish and two vegetables dish was $2. Every meat dish was $1, and a free vegetable dish was also given away. The portions weren't small, and there were a lot of things. It really did seem very affordable. What Aphrodite and the others wanted were the regular ones, beef patties and turkey slices. It was early in the morning, and they didn't want to eat fried food. The vegetables were red zucchini and lettuce. But compared to the low-quality ones they wanted, Jiang Hai wanted the high-quality ones. He wanted beef patties, turkey slices, fried meat slices, fried chicken fillets, and hot dog sausages. For the vegetables, he wanted lettuce, zucchini, and potato sticks. Jiang Hai's pancakes cost $6, and he asked for 2. The stall owner was very happy. After preparing the things Jiang Hai and the others wanted, they waited for the male owner to sell the pancakes. Of the 24 pancakes, apart from the 2 Jiang Hai wanted, each was $2, which added up to $44. The 2 Jiang Hai wanted were $12, which added up to $66. Jiang Hai gave them $100, and there was no need for change. He was in a good mood today. With such a generous tip, the stall owner worked even harder. He even gave Jiang Hai and the others bigger and thicker pancakes. The female stall owner also quickly added another portion of the meat that had already been prepared. The pancakes that had already been spread out were wrapped up according to their initial distribution. After picking up the meat and vegetables, she even sprinkled sauce on them. This stall really had a complete set of sauces. There were a total of 6 sauces, all of which were salsa, the most famous sauces in Mexico. In this world, they were considered unique. The red sauce, which was the usual hot sauce, was made with tomatoes, red peppers, onions, garlic, and coriander. It tasted very hot and sour. The raw sauce was made with tomatoes, lime juice, red peppers, onions, and coriander. It was a little more sour than the red sauce. The green sauce was made with Mexico's special green tomatoes and peppers. It tasted a little more refreshing, but wasn't as spicy. In addition, there was guacamole, burrito sauce, mango salsa. Almost anyone who liked to eat this kind of or material could find a taste that he liked here. Jiang Hai, for example, preferred burrito sauce and red sauce because they were spicier. The others, on the other hand, all made burrito sauce. Soon, the first 22 servings were wrapped up, and it was Jiang Hai's turn to have his 2 oversized pancakes. When the female stall owner finished making Jiang Hai's pancake, Aphrodite couldn't help but be a little surprised. She really gave Jiang Hai face. Their pancakes were already doubled the amount of meat, but Jiang Hai's pancake still looked like it was at least 3 times bigger than theirs. She had to admit that these 2 people were really happy. Jiang Hai took the pancake and took a big bite. In an instant, the taste of the sauce, meat, and vegetables directly rushed into his mouth. In addition to the originally very crispy skin, Jiang Hai's eyes unconsciously curved. If there was anything similar between Jiang Hai and him a year ago, other than his face, it would probably be his sense of taste. He really likes to eat, especially delicious food. Like this thing, perhaps in the eyes of the upper class, it's nothing more than street food, but in Jiang Hai's eyes, it's a pretty good delicacy. Let's go. Seeing how happy Jiang Hai was eating, Aphrodite couldn't help but smile. She carried the rest of the things and waved at Jiang Hai. At this time, Moses, Adams and the others had already driven out. They drove a total of 2 cars. In addition to Jiang Hai's MPV, there was also a car rented by Moses, Adams. Although the MPV was a little crowded, these girls obviously wouldn't sit in Moses Adams' car. Thus, the 2 cars displayed a very strange scene. One side was almost crowded to death, while the other side only had 1 car. Seeing that the car was parked, Aphrodite prepared to return to the car first and give the food to these people. And Jiang Hai also knew. He nodded while eating and walked toward the MPV. But just as Jiang Hai left the stall and was about to go to the MPV, his eyebrows suddenly jumped for no reason. This made Jiang Hai instantly alert. At this moment, a car engine appeared in Jiang Hai's ears. Then, a car quickly drove across the intersection in front of them. When it saw Jiang Hai, not only did the car not slow down, it even sped up. Seeing this scene, the alarm bells in Jiang Hai's heart rang loudly. He instantly took a step forward and pushed Aphrodite, who was still in front of him, toward his MPV. Jiang Hai's strength was so great that in an instant, this push almost sent Aphrodite flying. The pancakes in her hand also fell to the ground at this time, but this force allowed her to get in immediately. Everyone in the MPV, who originally wanted to open the door to take the pancakes, was stunned for a moment. They completely didn't understand why Jiang Hai suddenly attacked Aphrodite. Aphrodite herself was also a little surprised. After getting into the MPV, she looked back with a puzzled expression, wanting to see why Jiang Hai was doing this. But when she turned back, she saw a car speeding toward Jiang Hai. Seeing this scene, all the girls covered their mouths in surprise. If this car hit an ordinary person, it would probably be over in an instant, but Jiang Hai was Jiang Hai. The child of the dimension was not a joke. Seeing that the car was only about 10 meters away from him and had no intention of slowing down at all, Jiang Hai secretly cursed, "Damn it." At this speed, the car would reach him in less than a second. Jiang Hai didn't have much time left. But if he resigned himself to fate, that would not be Jiang Hai's way of doing things. In an instant, he jumped to the ground and rolled like a lazy donkey, dodging the front of the car by a hair's breadth. After the car missed Jiang Hai, it also spun and hit the curb on the left. The huge impact made the people in the car suffer a lot. But it was obvious that these people were already prepared because the moment the car was paralyzed, 4 people ran out of the car. These 4 people were all wearing safety helmets. It was obvious that the impact just now did not make them feel too uncomfortable. The only one who was affected was probably the driver. After these 4 people jumped out of the car, they reached behind them and 4 pistols appeared in their hands. Seeing these 4 people take out their guns, Jiang Hai's heart was also alarmed. "Close the door." Seeing that Aphrodite and the others were already scared silly, Jiang Hai ran away in a flash. After all, Aphrodite and the others were not kind people in the past. They closed the door immediately, and Jiang Hai instantly ran to Moses Adams' car behind the MPV. Moses Adams' reaction was not slow. When he saw the people in front of him get out of the car, he immediately hid in the driver's seat. When he saw Jiang Hai running over, he did not forget to open the door of the front passenger seat and let Jiang Hai in an instant. And the moment Jiang Hai flashed into the car, there were thunderous gunshots outside the car. The 4 people wearing safety helmets had guns in their hands and kept shooting at Jiang Hai. This car rented by Moses Adams had almost no reaction and was riddled with holes by these people. But fortunately, this car was not a bad car to begin with. It was a Cadillac CTS. Although it was not expensive, the car still cost more than $100,000. It was not sold in China at all. So although its bulletproof ability was not strong, it was not particularly weak either. At least it was not comparable to these people's pistols. "Boss, who did you provoke this time?" Holding his head and lying in the driver's seat, Moses Adams asked Jiang Hai with some confusion. It was obvious that he was also scared this time. He had never encountered such an attack before. "How would I know? These people, are they from the auction house? Don't they want me to take the money away?" Jiang Hai, who was also holding his head and squatting there, couldn't help but shout loudly. He really couldn't think of where these people came from. The only thing he could think of was probably the auction house. It shouldn't be possible. But after listening to Jiang Hai's words, Moses Adams was not sure. Although Phillips was not the largest auction house and would occasionally cheat others, it was still the 3rd largest auction house in the world after all. They also cared about their reputation. If this matter was spread out, who would come here to auction? That didn't seem likely. If not, why hasn't anyone come out to help yet? Maybe they heard Jiang Hai's words, but in Jiang Hai's slightly contemptuous voice, more than 20 security guards suddenly rushed out of the auction house in the distance. It had to be admitted that Jiang Hai was thinking too much. Although letting Jiang Hai take away the money made the people above Phillips a little uncomfortable, to put it bluntly, they were businessmen, not robbers. It was not worth it to cheat Jiang Hai of more than $1 billion and ruin their reputation. The reason why these people came out a little slowly was mainly because they had to report first. These people were specially left here by the auction house. After all, there were now jewelry worth $300 million and armor worth $1 billion here. If the other party was luring the tiger away from the mountain, the losses would be borne by them. However, Jiang Hai was their customer after all. If a customer was attacked as soon as he went out, they would be crazy to care. So it only took a minute for the person in charge to count the 20 security guards and go out with weapons to help. When the 4 people saw the 20 people coming out with weapons to help, they also panicked a little. Chapter 308. Retreat. The Phillips auction house was only a few dozen meters away from the place where Jiang Hai had an accident. When these people rushed out, the weapons in their hands were already in range. Many people had already opened fire. Compared to the small pistols in these people's hands, these security guards had big guns. Listening to the gunshots and feeling the bullets whizzing past them, the leader also knew that if they didn't leave now, they would die here. He immediately roared and wanted to leave, but how could it be so easy? Their car was already wrecked from the start. Now, the driver in the car was shaking his head as he climbed out of the car. He wanted to run now, but they didn't have a car. There were 2 cars in front of them that could run, but Aphrodite and the others were sitting in one of them. They had already locked the doors and windows, and Jiang Hai and Moses Adams were in the other one. How could it be that easy? Grab that MPV. Just as they were struggling, the driver who just got out of the car couldn't help but shout loudly. Hearing this voice, the other 4 bad guys rushed toward the MPV immediately. F***CK, they are going for Delina and the others. Do you have any weapons here? Seeing these people's actions, Jiang Hai, who had just breathed a sigh of relief because of the arrival of the security guards, instantly became angry again and asked Moses Adams loudly. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Moses Adams couldn't help but think for a moment, then he took out a wrench. There is only this in the car, but there is a gun in the trunk. Handing the wrench to Jiang Hai, Moses Adams said to Jiang Hai. He knew that Jiang Hai's skills were not bad. Now his only chance of survival was in Jiang Hai's hands. Okay. Go get it. Seeing that the people over there were almost in front of the MPV, Jiang Hai didn't care so much. He immediately opened the door and ran out, and Moses Adams also bent down to open the door and went to the trunk. At this moment, the fastest criminal had already arrived in front of the MPV. Of course, he couldn't pull the door open. After trying for a while, he smashed the car window with a punch and prepared to pull the car open from the inside. Unfortunately, the moment he stretched his hand in, Daliana, who had been hiding behind him, directly took out a modified knife and forcefully stabbed it into his hand. Although Daliana didn't have much strength, she was still able to stab a modified knife into his hand. The huge impact instantly pierced the man's hand and caused him to suffer a puncture wound. Ah! With a miserable cry, blood spurted out from his hand. His attempt to snatch the carriage was halted. As for the others, they originally thought that these women weren't a threat, but now they actually dared to fight back. They were simply courting death. They also raised their weapons in an instant. Seeing that these people were about to shoot, Jiang Hai had already arrived in front of the car. The wrench in his hand instantly smashed at the nearest gangster. Whoosh! The wrench was not small. It was thrown with Jiang Hai's full strength, plus the huge wind resistance, which caused a loud sound. The gangsters here were miserable. If they weren't wearing helmets, they might have a chance. But they were wearing helmets, so there was no way to hear it. With a bang, the wrench hit the gangster's head heavily. The huge impact of the wrench even directly smashed the gangster's helmet, and the gangster was also instantly smashed out, heavily hitting the other two gangsters who wanted to shoot. His head tilted, and no one knew whether he was dead or alive. Who the F***ck? Seeing that another one of his companions had fallen, the driver couldn't help but draw out his pistol at this time and shoot at Jiang Hai. But Jiang Hai had long been prepared for him. He raised his hand, and Jiang Hai rushed to the back of the MPV in front of him. He just avoided the gunman's shot. At this time, next to the Cadillac, Moses Adams had also taken out the gun case. Seeing his movements, Jiang Hai motioned him to throw the case directly. Without saying much, he threw the case directly and then hid behind the car. After Jiang Hai took the case, he immediately opened it. As the case was opened, a Beretta 92F appeared in his sight. Jiang Hai had also used this gun before. Immediately after loading the gun, Jiang Hai let out a long breath. This was the first time he used a gun to fight for his life. Take a hostage, or you can't escape. Just as Jiang Hai was holding the gun, he suddenly heard the voice of the gangsters outside. When he heard this person's voice, Jiang Hai couldn't help but secretly curse. They are really shameless. But this gave him an opportunity. He suddenly stood up from his half-squatting body and directly smashed the window on the other side of the MPV. When Aphrodite and others were ready to fight for their lives, Jiang Hai opened half of the door. Get down. Just when Jiang Hai opened this half of the door, the other half of the door was already opened by the other side. Seeing that it was Jiang Hai, Aphrodite and others didn't have time to think about what was going on. They instantly got down, and Jiang Hai also fired at this time. Sheila Rodney, who was slower to get down, even felt that the bullet flew over their heads. The people on the other side didn't expect Jiang Hai to open the door from the other side. In an instant, 6 or 7 blood flowers bloomed from the chests of the two gangsters who had just gotten up in front of the door. Jiang Hai didn't just shoot once, he shot continuously. Although the two gangsters protected their heads well, their bodies couldn't. In an instant, many bloody holes burst open. Their bodies went limp and the two fell to the ground. At this time, the gangster who was pinned to the door knew that if this continued, he would be dead for sure. So he endured the severe pain and actually pulled out the knife together with his hand. Then he fired continuously with his pistol. Feeling his attack, not only did Aphrodite and others get down, but Jiang Hai also dodged and got down on the ground. On the ground, Jiang Hai just happened to see the gangster's foot through the bottom of the car. Without saying anything, he directly shot the guy's ankle. The gangster only felt his foot go limp. He screamed and instantly fell to the side. He was really unlucky. His hand was stabbed first, then his foot was hit, but the worst was yet to come. As he fell to the ground, his eyes met with Jiang Hai's. Although he wanted to shoot in an instant, unfortunately, he was still half a beat too slow. Jiang Hai looked at the gangster and calmly pulled the trigger. The bullet almost instantly passed through his throat, bringing a burst of blood. His body couldn't help but droop down powerlessly. Who the F***ck, eat more. I surrender. Seeing Jiang Hai take care of all his men in almost an instant, the driver who was still running over here couldn't help but curse, but he didn't fight to the death. Instead, he directly threw the weapon in the car aside and surrendered to the security guards who had rushed over. The security guards were not the police, so they were also a little confused at this time. The laws of the United States were not much different from those of Huaxia. Although you can defend yourself with a gun, if the other party surrendered, threw the gun away, or lost the ability to fight, it would still be troublesome to kill him in such a situation. Some people would even consider such a move as intentional homicide. So at this time, these security guards were a little confused, but at this time, Jiang Hai was already in a killing frenzy. He immediately got up from the ground, gun in hand, and walked over to the gangster over there. Jiang, he has already surrendered, you can't kill him. Seeing Jiang Hai's action, Moses Adams rushed over immediately and put his hands around Jiang Hai's waist and said with a serious face. He and Jiang Hai have worked together for a long time. He knows that Jiang Hai is furious at this time, but he is a lawyer. He must stop him. Let me go. Feeling Moses Adams's action, Jiang Hai couldn't help but shout loudly. There are surveillance cameras here. He has already surrendered. If you kill him, there will be trouble. Leave the rest to me. Just leave it to me. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Moses Adams also said loudly. He was really afraid that Jiang Hai would shoot. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai's originally angry eyes calmed down a little. He knew that in such a thing, this person's intentional murder would definitely not escape, but he was angry. How could Jiang Hai not be angry if he just let him go? Feeling Jiang Hai's hesitant gaze, the man shrugged and walked toward the security guard in front of him indifferently. Looking at his annoying look, Jiang Hai slowly pressed the muzzle of the gun. Suddenly, his hand pulled the trigger and a bullet instantly shot toward the man's thigh. The powerful firepower of the 92F made the bullet instantly tear his clothes and penetrate his flesh and bones. Although it did not penetrate, the man still screamed and fell into a pool of blood while covering his leg. Hearing the gunshot, Moses Adams, who was still holding Jiang Hai, could not help but be stunned. He immediately turned around to look at the man and found that the man was still moving. This proved that Jiang Hai did not kill him. At this time, Jiang Hai also walked in front of the man. I won't kill you, but I will let you die in prison. In order to let you live better in prison, I will give you a gift. Bang bang bang. As Jiang Hai's voice fell, the gun in Jiang Hai's hand pulled the trigger again. The other leg and two arms of the man who was still screaming were bitten by Jiang Hai's bullets at this time. His screams echoed in the street. He heard that Huaxia people, especially the rich people in Huaxia, were very law-abiding. He had already surrendered, so why did he still shoot? He felt that he had hurt his bones this time. He thought about how his hands and legs were useless. If he were to go to prison, he might as well just kill himself. That kind of life would be better. WWA, WWA, WWA. At this time, the ear-piercing alarm rang. Jiang Hai casually threw the gun to the side and looked at the man on the ground. He knew that this man was not the mastermind. This matter was not over yet. Chapter 309. Hey, it seems that you won't be able to sleep well tonight, Moses Adams said jokingly as he handed Jiang Hai a can of coffee. Jiang Hai just shrugged. He didn't care much about it. He opened the cup of coffee and drank it. He looked up at the clock hanging on the wall of the police station. At this time, the clock had pointed to 6. It was not 6:00 in the morning, but 6 o'clock in the evening. Since he left Philip's office in Miami in the morning, he had been in the police station for 8 hours. At this time, only he and Moses Adams were in the Miami police station. Delina and the others had already gone back at noon. After all, they were the complete victims of today's incident, so they could leave after finishing their statements. As for Jiang Hai, as a victim of this incident and a murderer, he needed to stay here for a while. Moses Adams, on the other hand, had been running around. In the morning, he was copying the video. In the afternoon, he took the time to make a statement. At the same time, he was also looking for evidence for Jiang Hai. In fact, there was no evidence to speak of. Because whether it was the surveillance on the road, the surveillance of the auction house, or the civilian who set up the stall, or the car recorder, or the transcripts of the security guards, all proved that those people wanted to hit Jiang Hai. If they couldn't, they would get out of the car and shoot at Jiang Hai. The facts were very clear. The only thing that was not clear was that Jiang Hai shot the man after he surrendered. 3 of the 5 people who attacked Jiang Hai died. The first person who was hit by Jiang Hai with a wrench suffered from intracranial hemorrhage, skull fracture, and severe concussion. After the police arrived, he had been sent to the hospital. Moses Adams just sent news that the guy had cerebral palsy and would stay in bed for the rest of his life. The other person who survived was the one whose limbs were broken by Jiang Hai. This person was also a talent. After being sent to the hospital, he had an operation first. When he woke up at 6:00 in the afternoon, he said that he wanted to sue Jiang Hai. Today's incident became a different version of what had happened. He said that he and his 4 motorcycle enthusiasts were driving to a motorcycle club to have fun. On the way, his brakes failed. He almost hit Jiang Hai. After he stopped, his 4 friends got out of the car to see if Jiang Hai was all right. However, they realized that Jiang Hai was going to attack them. They were forced to fight back, but they were still beaten to death by Jiang Hai. In the end, he realized that the situation was not right and surrendered, but he was still beaten to such a state by Jiang Hai. He had to get the police to uphold justice for him. If they hadn't seen the surveillance with their own eyes, and if these guys didn't have criminal records, some of the police officers might have believed it, especially those who were more biased against Asians. After hearing Moses Adams's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be amused. He really knew how to twist facts. If he had been killed by them, perhaps it would have been an accident. The brakes of the car did fail, and these people did make an appointment to go to the motorcycle club on the phone. If there hadn't been a gunfight, and these people had killed him, then Jiang Hai would have died in vain. He had to admit that the person who planned to kill Jiang Hai, if he wasn't a repeat offender, then he really had some brains. Fortunately, the American police weren't all idiots. The surveillance video clearly showed that when these people hit Jiang Hai, when they got out of the car, Jiang Hai hadn't gotten up yet. They directly took out the pistols at their waists and started shooting. If it was really like what he said, why did they carry guns with them? They didn't wait for Jiang Hai to attack, and before the others could react, they had already opened fire. Moreover, at the last moment, they still wanted to rob the MPV. They deserved to be killed by Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai had no problem killing the 4 people. The only problem was that Jiang Hai crippled the person. Today's matter won't be over so easily. Throwing the empty coffee can into the trash can next to him, Jiang Hai looked at his watch and said faintly to Moses Adams. Moses Adams naturally knew that when Jiang Hai said it wasn't over, he didn't mean that Jiang Hai wasn't finished. He had known Jiang Hai for more than half a year. When had Jiang Hai ever suffered such a big grievance? This time, the Grim Reaper's scythe almost landed on his head. No matter what, he couldn't let the other party go easily. I have no problem with legal matters. As for other things, I may not be able to do it. Hearing what Jiang Hai said, Moses Adams sighed. It's not that he didn't want to help, but because he was a lawyer, there were some things that he couldn't cross the line. I understand this. Tell me what's going on. I can't get anything from the police. We don't have any power here. If you want to take revenge, you have to rely on yourself. Looking at Moses Adams in front of him, Jiang Hai nodded. He had never suffered such a big loss. This time, no matter what, he wouldn't let the other party go easily. I heard that these people may have the power of the underworld in Miami. Many of them have criminal records, but I don't know who ordered them or why, but I think someone may know. Looking at Jiang Hai, Moses Adams lowered his voice and whispered. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai raised his eyebrows. This was what he wanted. Jiang Hai, you can go, but these days, don't leave the United States. When the case is heard, I still need your cooperation. Jiang Hai is a big taxpayer in Winthrop. Naturally, the police there are very kind to Jiang Hai, including the police in Boston. They don't dare to offend Jiang Hai, but here is Miami, no one will care about Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai didn't care about the cold attitude of the police, because he didn't count on the police at this time. It is said that it is never too late for a gentleman to take revenge, but unfortunately, Jiang Hai is not a gentleman, he is a villain, so he will take revenge from morning to night. After leaving the police station, Jiang Hai called Aphrodite and told them that he was safe, then got into a Cadillac rented by Moses Adams. As Moses Adams started the engine, Jiang Hai followed him to the slums of Miami. On the way, he also told Jiang Hai where they were going. The place we are going to now is called Evil Ghost Bar. Last time, I got the gun and spear gun for you from here. I have a high school classmate who is now a supervisor here, but this person is not reliable, but for dollar's sake, they will get you whatever you want, Moses Adams said to Jiang Hai in the driver's seat. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai nodded secretly. He just wanted to know some information. Soon, as Moses Adams turned left and right, Jiang Hai and the others arrived at Evil Ghost Bar. This bar was located in the depths of the slums, but the hellish scene that Jiang Hai imagined was not here. On the contrary, the neighborhood was very prosperous, even comparable to those commercial districts, and there were many famous luxury cars on this block. Jiang Hai even saw a lot of Maseratis, Alfa Romeos, Ferraris, Porsches, and other cars parked on another street. The people walking on this block were also dressed in colorful clothes, and it was impossible to tell that this place was backward. This is sort of the middle point of the Miami area. It used to be as disgusting, dirty, and backward as other slums, but the boss here is a genius. After he consolidated the small gangs nearby, he cleaned up. Of course, it's not completely clean. It's better to say that it's gray than white, because there are a lot of underground casinos and high-end clubs here. Those who are involved in illegal activities don't dare to openly go to the city to play, so this is the best choice. While looking for a parking space, Moses Adams whispered to Jiang Hai. His car was not good here, of course, it was not bad either. After parking the car, he led Jiang Hai to the bar in the middle of the street with the evil ghost mask hanging on it. However, not everyone could enter this place. Without Moses Adams, it was estimated that Jiang Hai would not be able to enter this place. After coming in, Jiang Hai found that this place was not like the nightclub he imagined. The wild music inside made people very uncomfortable. Men and women were going crazy. Although there were a lot of cheers here, it was very quiet and there was no music. As Jiang Hai turned a corner, he understood why. Because at this time, in this big bar, there was no DJ or stage. Instead, there was a huge hexagonal iron cage. At this time, two strong men were standing in the iron cage, constantly tearing each other. There were no rules in this kind of fight. Unless one side surrendered or fainted, the game would continue. Even if someone died, they could only say that they deserved it. At this time, there were two people on the stage. One was a typical Westerner with a huge body, big head, and white skin. His arms were thicker than his head. He was 2 meters tall and also very intimidating. His opponent was an Asian who looked about 1.75 meters tall. Although his body was also muscular and unusually tight, it was not exaggerated. His hands were bandaged and he habitually raised his right leg like a cobra, looking for an opportunity to attack. Jiang Hai knew these two fighting techniques. Bell had taught him before. The Westerners used wrestling, which was a very popular fighting technique in the United States. Articulation and throwing skills were very strong in all fighting events, but what he was facing was not an ordinary fighting technique. Chapter 310. Muay Thai, Thai boxing, belonged to Thailand's traditional fighting techniques. It was extremely lethal and was a sport known for its strength and agility. If one were to say that the world's major boxing techniques actually had their own specialties, Taekwondo was good at kicking, Judo was good at joint techniques, wrestling was good at throwing, boxing was good at upper body punching and lower body small steps, Muay Thai was a fist technique that specialized in elbows, kicks, and close combat. Muay Thai's elbows could be said to be the heaviest elbows in the world. One elbow strike could even shatter a person's skull. As for their leg techniques, a long time ago, they were used to kick coconut trees by the beach. Only when a coconut tree was broken could they be considered to have reached the pinnacle of their leg techniques. Therefore, don't be fooled by the fact that the people who practiced Muay Thai were not considered to be tall and short in stature. Aside from their bones and muscles, their bodies were extremely resilient. Not only could they withstand attacks, but their attack power was also very strong. According to Bell, the most lethal fighting technique in the world was Muay Thai. However, Muay Thai was a little troublesome because it did not have any joint techniques. Therefore, when fighting, it would be more or less at a disadvantage. Especially in some gambling matches, the most open UFC had a lot of rules. Consecutive knee strikes were not allowed, and elbow strikes were not allowed. At the same time, a high whip kick to the back of the head was not allowed. In the world of Muay Thai, its ranking was not very high. Speaking of which, some martial arts fans might be unhappy. If they were talking about lethality, it would definitely be Hua Xia's Kung Fu that was the best. However, Hua Xia's Kung Fu had a special characteristic. What could be passed on had been simplified and was considered to be half performance. The truly lethal Kung Fu was not passed on to outsiders. The idea of passing it on to males and not females made Hua Xia's Kung Fu only exist in the hands of a few people. However, there was no way to promote these things. Ah! Suddenly, a loud shout from the ring attracted Jiang Hai's attention. At this time, the big white man in the ring attacked first. With a loud shout, his left hand turned into a claw and grabbed the man. This was also a wrestling gesture. As long as the opponent was caught, a series of throwing skills would follow. The opponent wouldn't even have time to react before being thrown to the ground. Jiang Hai's eyes were filled with disbelief. This Muay Thai expert wasn't joking. When he saw the person rushing over, he naturally knew that he couldn't be caught. Thus, he slipped and dodged the man's hand. At the same time, his leg whipped towards the man's left rib. With a bang, the big man took a kick from the master, but he didn't retreat. Instead, he endured the pain and grabbed the man's ankle with his empty right hand. With one hand, he threw the Muay Thai master into the iron cage next to him, causing the cage to shake. As for the audience outside the arena, they couldn't help but scream because of this violent scene. For them, this was what they came to see. I'm interested. We can place our bets later, but let's go and order some drinks first. Moses Adams couldn't help but smile when he saw Jiang Hai staring at the ring intently. Men always had no resistance to this kind of blood-boiling battle. However, they weren't here today to watch the competition. There's such a fun place. You didn't bring me here to play before, Jiang Hai said to Moses Adams as he reluctantly looked at the Muay Thai master and got up again. This place was indeed very interesting. Forget it, boss. You have so many pairs of eyes staring at you. Would I dare to bring you here? If it's just you and me next time, then it's fine. Moses Adams waved his hand when he heard Jiang Hai's words. Aphrodite and the others weren't joking. Jiang Hai could ignore them, but he couldn't. After all, these women were Jiang Hai's people. There will be a chance. Thinking that Aphrodite and the others had been watching him closely recently, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile awkwardly. However, he would definitely come here again in the future, so he wasn't in a hurry. Hey, Moses, you're here again. Is the guy I gave you last time good? Moses Adams and Jiang Hai just came from the big bar, and a man who looked about the same age as Moses Adams came over with a big belly. He handed him a glass of whiskey and said with a smile. Such a big lawyer naturally wouldn't owe him money for drinks. I'm driving tonight, and I'm going back tonight. Forget about the drink. Boss, are you interested? Moses Adams pushed the glass in front of him forward and said to the man opposite him, then asked Jiang Hai. Just to calm down. Jiang Hai didn't hold back. After casually stuffing $100 bill into the money box next to him, he picked up the glass of whiskey in front of him and directly drank it without putting any ice in it. Most of the whiskey in Miami was produced in South America, which was slightly different from the whiskey in Boston. The whiskey in Boston was produced in Canada or the United States. Maybe the raw materials were different, so it was mellower. But here, there was a hint of sweetness. To be honest, Jiang Hai still preferred the whiskey here, at least it didn't taste so bad in the mouth. What a generous boy. Looking at Jiang Hai in front of him, the big man on the other side couldn't help but laugh. Well, John, let me introduce you. This is my boss. We are not here to drink today. I have something to ask you. Hearing the big man's happy look, Moses Adams knocked on the table, then put a roll of whiskey on the bar, but he didn't give it to the man. Instead, he asked first. Tell me, I'll see if it's worth this price. At a glance, the man named John had already seen the amount of money in this roll of whiskey. If he guessed right, it should be $1,000. As a big lawyer, he is more generous than the average person. Don't worry, you will definitely be satisfied with this price. I want to know the news of Greyhound Terry. Pushing his glasses up, Moses Adams asked. The Greyhound Terry he mentioned was the driver who hit Jiang Hai today. This man's original name was Terry Anderson, but after Moses Adams asked, the police told him that this guy's other name was the name he used to hang around here. Greyhound Terry? He's just a nobody, we're all old classmates, he's only worth this much. Hearing Moses Adams' words, the man smiled and stretched out 2 fingers, indicating that the news of this guy is only worth $200. I have other things to ask you. But Moses Adams didn't take the money back, but directly threw the roll of money to him and asked. Jiang Hai didn't come here just to catch small fish this time. This Greyhound Terry is a gangster around here. He used to steal cars. After he went in a few times, he met a leader in Miami, named Justin Parker. Now he can be regarded as a small leader. He usually fights and sells flour. I know you definitely don't want to hear his news, so I'll tell you a little more, for the sake of these dollars. Picking up the money in front of him, John smiled and continued to talk to Jiang Hai. The man who hit Jiang Hai today is just a nobody. Such a guy, even if you give him 10 times the courage, he wouldn't dare to hit Jiang Hai. As soon as they heard the name, Jiang Hai, they knew that the person who wanted Jiang Hai's life should be this guy named Justin Parker. Jiang Hai is also *King Dog. How can he be like this? Every time he leaves Winthrop, he has to run into a guy named Justin. But last time, at most, he was embarrassed, but this time, he was going to lose his life. Terry wasn't a powerful person, but this Justin Parker wasn't someone to be trifled with. This kid is a mix of Black and Latin American. He was an orphan since childhood. He was very ruthless. When he was in the orphanage, he once stabbed a child older than him to death. Because of this, he was sent to juvenile detention. Later, he married the son of a Colombian tycoon. After they were sent out together, he worshipped this big brother as his godfather. But a wolf cub can't be raised well. About 5 years ago, this guy first killed this big brother's son, then killed this big brother, and took over many of this big brother's businesses. Although he is not the most famous person in this area, his wealth is worth tens of millions. However, his net worth was also in the tens of millions. He had dozens of underlings under him and managed several blocks. Recently, I heard that he is very close to a rich second generation from Huaxia. That person provided him with funds and let him start to occupy the entire gray area of Miami. Recently, many bosses have been studying how to get rid of him. Looking at Jiang Hai and Moses Adams, this person couldn't help but whisper with a smile. Hearing this, Jiang Hai's frown unconsciously loosened. He was originally very surprised because since he came here, he didn't seem to have any conflicts with the locals. The only time he had a conflict was when he bought the yacht. But a manager who sold the yacht was not arrogant enough to hire a hitman to kill him. So when this person mentioned Justin Parker, Jiang Hai was very puzzled. Because in his memory, he didn't seem to have any relationship with these gray areas. But now he suddenly understood. The rich second generation from Huaxia, needless to say, is Qin Fun. After being beaten by me, this guy seems to be very dishonest. He even dares to do such a thing behind my back. Seeing Jiang Hai's narrowed eyes, Moses Adams also smiled. He knew that every injustice has its perpetrator, and every debt has its debtor. This time, he had found the debtor. As for Jiang Hai, he picked up the wine glass in front of him and drank the contents of the glass in one big gulp. Boss, if you want revenge, I shouldn't interfere, but you still need to consider the method. The other party has dozens of underlings. Seeing Jiang Hai's appearance, Moses Adams also said softly. This matter is really not easy to handle. I remember that in the gray area, there seems to be a saying that money can solve this problem. Where is it? Chapter 311. Here is fine. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, John shrugged. This was the middle of the gray area. Naturally, they would accept some special jobs. For example, if someone wanted to hire a hitman to kill someone, they liked such big clients very much. That's the best. 10 million for the head of Justin Parker. No matter who it is, if he brings his head here, 10 million is his. 20 million for the head of the Huaxia. Similarly, no matter who brought it, take it away for 20 million. Jiang Hai looked at John in front of him and poured himself another glass of whiskey. While smelling the strong alcohol smell of the whiskey, Jiang Hai said the above paragraph as if he was sleep-talking. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, John on the opposite side was stunned. Taking out 30 million just to kill 2 people? If this guy is not bullshitting, then he is really rich. Boss, isn't your price a bit too high? Although Moses Adams had nothing to do with these gray areas, it was essential for him to understand the market conditions of various periods, so he also knew the prices here. Even if these 2 people had a lot of power, 30 million for their lives was really a bit of a fuss. It doesn't matter, the money is worth it. Jiang Hai couldn't deal with the other party himself. First, the police were watching him now. Second, he didn't think that he was now a match for dozens of armed robbers. If he could spend money to solve the problem, then it was naturally the best. Anyway, he was not short of money now. Are you sure? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, John's breathing became heavy. For him, no, even for the people behind him, 30 million was a lot of money. I'm very sure. I'll leave this matter to you. Hearing John's words, Jiang Hai looked at him and nodded seriously. He then turned to Moses Adams beside him and said something to him. I'll be staying here for another week to 10 days. I hope to resolve this matter during this period of time. Jiang Hai said softly as he gently knocked on the bar counter. Then the three of them looked at each other and couldn't help but laugh. For some people, not to mention 10 days, 3 days was more than enough. Less than half an hour later, Jiang Hai and Moses Adams left the place. When they passed by the iron cage again, the two men were already spent. The white man's face was disfigured, his nose was fractured, one of his eyes could no longer be opened, and several of his ribs were broken. One of his front teeth was knocked out, and his head was covered in blood. At this time, he was leaning against the iron cage, gasping for breath, while the Muay Thai master opposite him was already lying on the ground. Looking at his tightly shut eyes and his bent arm, if it wasn't for his undulating chest, it was almost certain that this person was already dead. But even if he wasn't dead now, this person probably wouldn't be able to get out of bed without at least a year of rest. And this white man, although he won, his situation wasn't much better than the person lying on the ground. After taking a look at the white man, Jiang Hai turned around and left. Unfortunately, he didn't see the good scene just now. That night, Jiang Hai and Moses Adams drove back to the hotel. After returning to the hotel, they found that Aphrodite and the others were in their rooms and didn't go back to rest. When they saw Jiang Hai come back, they all stood up nervously, especially Delina and Marion. The two girls immediately ran over and hugged Jiang Hai. To be honest, today's scene was too scary. Okay, I'm fine now, aren't I? Good girls, have you eaten yet? If not, ask them to send it up. Touching the hair of the two girls, Jiang Hai said slowly. He knew that today's incident had indeed caused an indelible psychological trauma to these girls. It seems that as a father, he really didn't take advantage of his position. Ahem, boss, I'll go back first, you can continue. Looking at the scene in front of him, Moses Adams smiled awkwardly, then turned and left Jiang Hai's room. He felt embarrassed standing in Jiang Hai's room. Oh, okay, help me look after tonight's matter, I won't treat you badly. Hearing Moses Adams' words, Jiang Hai also turned his head and said to him with a soft smile. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Moses Adams also nodded and respectfully left the room and returned to his room. Just as he closed Jiang Hai's door, the other girls, like Delina and Marion, rushed up and hugged Jiang Hai tightly, as if they were really afraid of losing him. Ahem, don't be like this, let me sit down first. Feeling his body getting heavier and heavier, Jiang Hai couldn't help but cough twice. Hearing Jiang Hai's cough, the girls reacted and let Jiang Hai sit on the sofa over there. However, they still refused to leave Jiang Hai. Delina and Marion hugged Jiang Hai's arms tightly from both sides, not letting go. Jenny and Bridget sat on the carpet, one of them hugging Jiang Hai's leg, while Ohilia and Shira firmly held Jiang Hai's hands. As for Becky and Hilda, they hugged Jiang Hai's shoulders. Dana was more direct and directly hugged Jiang Hai's waist. The pair of fully grown things just happened to press on Jiang Hai's lower abdomen, making Jiang Hai feel a little embarrassed. But before he had the time to feel embarrassed, Aphrodite had already walked behind him and hugged Jiang Hai's neck from behind. The pair of fully grown things just happened to be at the back of Jiang Hai's head, making it difficult for Jiang Hai to relax or exert force. After all, if he exerted force, it would be easy for problems to arise. I say, I'm fine, right? You're fine too, aren't you? Have you eaten anything? Let's order some food. Feeling the softness coming from all directions, Jiang Hai couldn't help but say helplessly. We can't eat. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Aphrodite, who was hugging Jiang Hai's head, said to Jiang Hai with a slightly sobbing tone. If you haven't lost something, you won't know how to cherish it. These girls went from having nothing in the past to becoming what they were now. This kind of life was something they had never dreamed of before. It could be said that the life by Jiang Hai's side now was not an exaggeration to say that it was heaven. At least, it was so in their eyes. They could talk happily every day, work hard, eat delicious food, and have Jiang Hai stuffed in their hearts. They had beautiful clothes to wear, good sisters by their side, and they didn't have to look at anyone's face. This kind of life could only be considered good in the eyes of ordinary people, but in the eyes of these girls, it was already the best. It was precisely living in this kind of environment that made them all the more reluctant. If anything happened to Jiang Hai, to them, Jiang Hai was really their everything. In the past, apart from Aphrodite, the other girls' feelings for Jiang Hai were mostly to repay his kindness. But after this time, it had slowly changed. Now, in their eyes, Jiang Hai was not only their benefactor, but also their meal ticket. After this time, they finally understood that Jiang Hai's position in their hearts was very important. If there were only 100 things in their hearts, then Jiang Hai already occupied more than 80. This kind of feeling wasn't love, nor was it liking, but it was more than liking. This kind of dependence made them completely unable to imagine what would happen to them if something happened to Jiang Hai. Then what do you want to do? This can't go on forever, how about you all go back to sleep? Hearing that the girls didn't want to eat, Jiang Hai didn't know what to say. After hesitating for a moment, he could only say this. We don't want to go back, I'm scared, I want to sleep with you. But after listening to Jiang Hai's words, the reaction of the 10 girls became even more intense. Aphrodite and the others didn't say anything, but Delina and Marion had already raised their heads, their big eyes were filled with tears. Seeing this, Jiang Hai couldn't help but feel helpless. But this is not good. Hearing the girls' thoughts, Jiang Hai couldn't help but helplessly say. I don't care, we just want to sleep with you. Hearing Jiang Hai's tangled words, Marion also threw a tantrum, but to be honest, in this situation, they really didn't dare to go back to sleep. Feeling the girls' firm hearts, Jiang Hai helplessly sighed. If it's a blessing, it's not a curse, but if it's a curse, it can't be avoided. Then, where are we going to sleep? On the sofa, that's it? Go back to the room and sleep. Looking at the girls around him who were like frightened bunnies, Jiang Hai helplessly shrugged. The girls listened to his words, nodded, and followed Jiang Hai back to the room. Lying on Jiang Hai's big bed, the originally very big bed couldn't accommodate 11 people. The 11 people were almost tightly squeezed together, but they didn't have a trace of impatience. Smelling Jiang Hai's scent, these girls could finally sleep peacefully. As for Jiang Hai, he was also a little sleepy. Although his nose was full of the girl's scent, which made Jiang Hai's heart pound, he couldn't really move. While Jiang Hai was sleeping soundly here, things became complicated on the gray streets of Miami. Son of A.B*TCH, who the F*CK, 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 F*CK. Angry shouts came from the second floor of a nightclub, accompanied by the sound of things being smashed. There was almost no one in the most popular nightclub at this time because this was Justin Parker's base camp. Half an hour after Jiang Hai and Moses Adams left, the news that Justin's head was worth $10 million had spread throughout Miami. Although the tycoons in Miami did not care about $10 million, who would complain about money? Chapter 312. Bastard, bastard, bastard. How dare you cheat me like this? How is this a fat sheep? This is clearly a fierce tiger. 10 million. Even I, Justin Parker, have a time when my head is worth 10 million. Grabbing the ashtray in his hand, the half-brown-skinned man slammed it to the ground and roared loudly in English with a clear Spanish accent. At this time, the other 2 lackeys in the room couldn't help but hide far away in fear of being caught in the crossfire. Boss, it's no use throwing a tantrum now. I reckon those people who came to kill you are almost here. You have to think of a way. Why don't we go into hiding first and lie low in Colombia for a while? One of the lackeys couldn't help but ask in a low voice when he saw that the crazy boss seemed to have calmed down after throwing everything out. That's all we can do for now, but that guy is worse off than me. I can run, but can he? Justin Parker helplessly rubbed his temples and couldn't help but snort coldly. The person he was talking about was naturally Qin Fun. Just as Jiang Hai thought, Qin Fun had no intention of stopping. After Jiang Hai injured him, Jiang Hai knew that Qin Fun wouldn't stop so easily, so he specially called Qi Li. Qi Li also knew the importance of adding insult to injury, so she called the Qin family's rivals. The Qin family immediately arranged for a special police team to go to Miami to arrest Qin Fun. But it had to be said that Qin Fun was really lucky. He was discharged on the third day, and the special police arrived on the night of his discharge, leaving them only an empty ward. After avoiding the special police team and using dollar to open a path, Qin Fun began to implement his plan after meeting Justin Parker. Although this guy was a second-generation rich kid, he wasn't particularly stupid. While he was taking revenge on Jiang Hai, he also wanted to use the money in his hands to take root here. Jiang Hai's incident told him that no matter where you were, having your own power was the most important. Others were unreliable. Therefore, after he approached Justin Parker, he became his partner. He was responsible for providing the money, and Justin Parker would control the other streets here. If the time came and they broke into a huge gray world, he would not ask to control it. He only needed this gray world to protect him and get a share of the profits. Since there was such a good thing, Justin Parker naturally agreed. It was not that he had never thought of taking advantage of the situation, but there were 4 domestic soldier kings as bodyguards, in addition to a few Blackwater security guards. With the dozens of people in his hands, if he wanted to take down this group of people, even if he won, he would lose all of them. Under such circumstances, cooperation was the best choice. And their cooperation naturally needed proof of their allegiance. Qin Fun's proof of allegiance was $1 million in cash. If Justin Parker couldn't afford it, then he would help Qin Feng kill Jiang Hai. That was why today's incident happened. They had to admit that they had underestimated Jiang Hai. If it wasn't Greyhound Terry's group of 5 who came today, but Justin Parker and the others, they would have been taken out by the police. Do you think the police in Miami are so incompetent? A gang like this would definitely have surveillance cameras. In any case, Justin Parker knew that he had kicked an iron plate this time. He was really in trouble this time. Contact the ship immediately. I'll leave tonight. Thinking of his underling's words, Justin Parker sighed and stood up. He knew that once he left, his territory and business here would all be gone, but what could he do? Compared to Earth and business, life was obviously more valuable. $10 million for his life. Not to mention others, he was very tempted when he heard the 10 million. If it weren't for the fact that he only had one life, he even wanted to exchange his head for money. That was $10 million. But it was too late to say anything now. He had no other choice but to sigh. After instructing his underling, Justin Parker stood up and was about to go out. His underling also picked up his hat and walked over, but just as he handed the hat to Justin Parker, a switchblade appeared in his hand. Huh. Feeling that the corner of his eye caught a glimmer of light, Justin Parker, who had many years of experience in fighting, also felt the danger and retreated in an instant, but it was still a step too late. The other party's knife had already slashed over. With a rip, Justin Parker's clothes, together with his stomach, were instantly ripped open. Sauron, you. Looking at the knife in his hand and his underling who was still bleeding, Justin Parker was shocked. Boss, your head is worth $10 million. They said that no matter who takes your head, they can get $10 million. Boss, you also know the situation in my family. I have a mother who is addicted to drugs, a girlfriend who is a special service person, 2 younger brothers, and a younger sister. Boss, I don't want to mingle anymore. I want a new life, so, boss, I'm sorry. Looking at Justin Parker in front of him, this underling kept talking. Looking at his trembling body, he knew that it was not easy for him to make this decision. There was no absolute loyalty in this world. The only thing that mattered was whether the price was high enough. Husband and wife were birds in the same forest. When disaster struck, they would fly away separately, let alone an underling. You bastard. Looking at his underling's appearance, Justin Parker was not to be trifled with. He immediately pulled out a pistol from behind him and shot 3 times at the underling who was about to pounce on him. After the gunshots ended, the underling fell into a pool of blood. Then Justin Parker covered the wound on his stomach while pointing the gun at the remaining underling. However, this underling did not seem to have any disloyalty. At this time, he was scared silly. Seeing the boss pointing the gun at him, he immediately raised his hands, and a foul smell came from his crotch. Boss, don't kill me. This has nothing to do with me. I'm loyal to you. Hearing this person's words, Justin Parker could not help but hesitate because he could see that this person was indeed not a threat. Although the attack just now did not cut open his stomach, it still made him bleed. After a while, he felt a little dizzy. Now, he really needed a helper. Don't talk nonsense. I know you are loyal. Now hurry up and get the car. If I can escape this time, then you will be my #1 confidant. Putting down the gun, a trace of fatigue flashed across Justin Parker's face as he said to the lackey. Of course, the latter sentence was just a pie in the sky. Right now, he had no one to trust. Okay, boss. Hearing Justin Parker's words, the underling immediately ran out of the room, and Justin Parker sat powerlessly on the chair. Looking at his bleeding stomach, he took out a stapler from the cabinet and forcefully stapled the wound together. He had to admit that this kind of person was not an ordinary kind of ruthless. After stapling the wound, he tore off a new set of clothes and wrapped the wound up. At this time, the sound of a car horn came from outside. Taking a deep breath, Justin Parker walked down from upstairs and arrived at the entrance of the nightclub. This surprised him because he did not see a car. Just as he was puzzled, 2 headlights suddenly lit up. He squinted his eyes and looked back. He saw a car speeding towards him. He didn't even have a chance to react. The car hit him at full speed and sent him flying. Before flying, he only saw the ferocious face of the underling in the driver's seat who had been scared to the point of wetting himself. While Justin Parker's soul had already returned to hell, Qin Feng's situation was not too good either. It had to be known that Justin Parker, the boss, was only worth $10 million, while his head was worth $20 million. Those people would not let go of $10 million, let alone $20 million, so there were even more people on his side who wanted to kill him. Even the bodyguards of Blackwater were looking at him with a strange look. This made Qin Feng very afraid, very afraid. But no matter how afraid he was, there was nothing he could do. Right now, the only people he could trust were the 4 people he had brought over from China. After all, their families were still in China, and he had chips to blackmail them. At this time, Qin Feng was holed up in his hiding place. Hearing the gunshots outside from time to time, he was really panicking this time. For the first time in his life, he felt some regret. Why did he have to provoke Jiang Hai when he had nothing better to do? Was Jiang Hai so easy to provoke? Who would have thought that such an ordinary-looking man would be so rich? With America, there's nothing money can't do. Recalling what his father had said to him when he left, Qin Feng felt very regretful and helpless. He did not know if he would be able to leave this place alive this time. Young master, the people from Blackwater will help you hold the front for the time being. We've already arranged a ship for you. Let's go to South America tonight. At this moment, the door to his room opened. The bodyguard who had been beaten up like a pig by Jiang Hai rushed in from outside and spoke to Qin Feng as he ran. Then what are we waiting for? Let's go. Ignoring the pain in his ribs, Qin Feng did not say much. He shouted and was about to leave. Young master, this way. Hearing Qin Feng's words, a sharp light flashed in this person's eyes, and he pointed in the direction of the back door. Qin Feng didn't think too much about it and turned around to leave. Just as he turned his back to this person's hands were fixed on Qin Feng's head. Just as Qin Feng was about to scold this guy, he felt a pain in his neck. In an instant, the view in front of his eyes turned 108 degrees. In the end, he only saw the bodyguard directly behind him. Before he could understand how he saw his bodyguard, his body had already collapsed powerlessly. It was still the same sentence. There was no such thing as absolute loyalty in this world. Whether or not one would betray depended on whether or not one had enough bargaining chips. Chapter 313. Hiss. A strange feeling invaded the nerves in Jiang Hai's brain. He, who was still in a sleeping state, instantly opened his eyes. He first looked around and found that Delina, Marian, and the other women were still sleeping beside him like last night. But when he looked down, he found that Aphrodite had woken up at some point and was playing with something. Seeing that Jiang Hai was awake, she couldn't help but smile awkwardly. "You. What are you doing?" Seeing Aphrodite's appearance, Jiang Hai subconsciously wanted to yell. At the same time, he immediately pulled his body back and pulled up his pants that had already been pulled down. But when he remembered that there were other women beside him, Jiang Hai couldn't help but lower his voice and look at Aphrodite with some surprise. What am I doing? Isn't it obvious?" Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Aphrodite's face couldn't help but redden, but she didn't say anything shyly. Instead, she mustered up her courage and deliberately crawled towards Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai didn't notice that Aphrodite had already taken off her jacket at some point. Now, she only had one piece of underwear on her body. Her voluptuous upper body was firmly encircled by the singlet, creating an abnormally deep ravine. In between her slender waist and slender legs, there was only a very small pair of pants that matched the singlet. The way she crawled forward was indescribably seductive. Moreover, the two of them were in intimate contact just now. "You're wrong." Seeing Aphrodite crawling over, Jiang Hai couldn't help but say weakly. "I know, but I just can't control myself. I'm willing to give you everything. I don't ask you to give me any status. I don't need to be your wife, nor do I need to be your lover. I just... your job. When you need it, you can use me from head to toe." Seeing that Jiang Hai was somewhat retreating, after yesterday's crisis, Aphrodite, who had already thought things through, was ready to take the initiative and crawl closer and closer to Jiang Hai. No, there are others." Looking at Aphrodite's serious expression, Jiang Hai cursed in his heart. He retreated while whispering, but it was obvious that this matter couldn't convince Aphrodite. "It doesn't matter. Maybe you feel wrong, but everyone here, including Delina and Marian, actually has the same feelings for you. You don't need to care, and I won't care either." After hearing Jiang Hai's words, Aphrodite continued. Sister Aphrodite, what are you guys doing?" Perhaps because Aphrodite's voice was a little too loud, she couldn't help but wake up Delina on Jiang Hai's left. Delina opened her eyes in a daze and asked curiously. I need to go to the toilet." The moment Delina woke up, Jiang Hai and Aphrodite were stunned for a moment, and Jiang Hai also suddenly said at this time, then in a flash, jumped off the bed and went to the toilet. And Aphrodite looked at Jiang Hai's back and couldn't help but curl her lips. She didn't succeed this time. She didn't know when the next chance would come. She felt that Jiang Hai was not uninterested in her, he was very interested in her, but for some reason, he didn't act like a man and pounce on her. This made Aphrodite feel a little gratified in her heart, but also a little helpless. She was gratified because Jiang Hai really valued her, so he wouldn't hurt her. And she was helpless. In fact, in the deepest part of her heart, she really liked Jiang Hai, but she hoped that Jiang Hai would hurt her. When the sound of Jiang Hai taking a shower came from the toilet, all the girls woke up. After sleeping last night, these girls had recovered a lot. When Jiang Hai came out, they went in to wash up one by one. After everything was done, everyone went downstairs to eat breakfast. Originally, Aphrodite and the others had suggested that they should check out of the other rooms and stay in Jiang Hai's room. But at this time, Jiang Hai, who was already alarmed, didn't agree. What a joke. It was okay to sleep like this for one night, but to sleep like this every day, it would kill. So under Jiang Hai's insistence, they all went back to their rooms. When breakfast was almost finished, Moses Adams came down with a yawn. Jiang Hai slept very well that night, but he almost didn't sleep at all because Justin Parker's bounty had been claimed by someone else in the first half of the night. In the second half of the night, Qin Fan's bounty had also been claimed, which meant that the game between the two of them was over. After telling this news to Jiang Hai didn't care. If the 30 million was gone, then it was gone. He didn't care. But if he didn't kill these two guys, he really wouldn't be happy. Now that they were dead, although it was a pity that Jiang Hai didn't do it himself, it still made him feel relieved. Now they can have some fun. After resting in the hotel for another day, Jiang Hai still remembered what he had promised Alina and the others the next day. The next day, they sat in a minibus that Jiang Hai had specially rented and drove to Orlando. The people in China were familiar with Orlando because of a team here, the Orlando Magic. In the NBA, the first center was Shaquille O'Neal. After Shaquille O'Neal was Yao Ming, and at the end of Yao Ming's career, the first center to succeed him was Orlando Magic's Wei Zhongcheng. But later, it turned out that this guy wasn't as loyal as he said. But to be honest, Orlando wasn't a place that attracted star players because it was too small. Orlando was a city in the central part of Florida. It was located on a swamp, and the entire city's population was only 220,000. In China, a bigger town had more people than this city. But even so, this was still one of the biggest land masses in Florida. It was the seat of Orange County, and this place was called Orange County. It was indeed a little like a citrus. It was the largest citrus fruit distribution center in the United States. There weren't any manors or ranches nearby. 90% of the farmers grew oranges, and the oranges here were quite good. It was very appropriate to say that they were sold abroad. In China, many oranges imported from the United States, such as blood oranges, were produced here. Of course, most of them were actually from Lu province, but the variety was imported from there. Otherwise, it would be too expensive to import an orange from there. But he had to admit that the oranges here were really delicious. After buying some oranges on the roadside, Jiang Hai even had the idea of transplanting a few of them back. But don't underestimate Orlando. It was the most famous tourist city in the United States. The world's largest Disneyland, Universal Studios, Ocean World, Kennedy Space Center, and Harry Potter's Magic World were all here. It could be said that this city wasn't big, but it had a lot of fun. Jiang Hai didn't check out of his room in Miami, but it didn't prevent him from playing here for a few more days. Compared to the profit he made this time, it didn't matter if his room was empty for a few days. Rich people could be so capricious. After driving from Miami to Orlando, Jiang Hai picked a 5-star hotel to check in. After a day of playing in downtown Orlando, Jiang Hai and the others went to Orlando Disneyland the next day. This Disneyland started to receive guests in 1971, and in 1971, it invested $400 million. The whole park covered a total of 124 square kilometers, with 4 super large theme parks, namely Disneyland's Future, Disneyland's Animal Kingdom, Disneyland's Hollywood Studios, Disneyland's Magic Kingdom, 3rd Water Park, 32 resort hotels, and 784 campsites. They had to admit that this was a really big place. Jiang Hai and the others were only planning to play here for a day, but after a day, they had just finished visiting a theme park. This place was really too big, so after hesitating for a while, they checked out of their room in Orlando and stayed in a hotel in Disneyland. The next day, the 3rd day, they still played here. After a total of 3 days, they probably finished all the things here. In the past few days, even with Jiang Hai's physical fitness, he couldn't bear it. After playing in Disneyland, they didn't rush back, but continued to play in Harry Potter's Magic World. This place was a theme park jointly established by Warner Brothers and Universal Studios. Compared to Disneyland, this place was much smaller. It was only 787 acres, or about 3 square kilometers. It was a very small place, and there were only 2 main places to play. One was Hogwarts Castle, and the other was Hogsmeade Village. The former was where Harry Potter taught, and it was also the starting point of many events. The latter was the small village that Harry Potter once sneaked into with his invisibility cloak. Jiang Hai didn't read all of Harry Potter, because when he first came out of Harry Potter, he didn't like reading. Later, he started to like reading novels, and he had reached the age where he didn't read Harry Potter. As for the movie, he had only watched the first one. After playing there for a day, they went to the Kennedy Space Center. This is the place where space shuttles are launched. They can come here to watch. To be honest, Jiang Hai has seen satellite launches on TV before, but this is the first time he can see a space shuttle launch with his own eyes. They were lucky when they came here. It just happened that the launch would take place the next day. That night, Jiang Hai and the others deliberately stayed in the minibus. The next day, after seeing the space shuttle launch, Jiang Hai couldn't help but open his mouth wide with emotion. Although it wasn't launched by his countrymen, the shock really made Jiang Hai sigh. Human beings had now begun to compete for the universe. The universe was about to be conquered, so how long could the mystery of the seabed remain? It seemed that he had to speed up his pace. Chapter 314. Hi, Jiang, welcome. Welcome. You look really handsome in formal wear. Opening his arms, the person in charge of Phillips in Miami couldn't help but give Jiang Hai a warm hug. However, Jiang Hai just smiled and didn't say anything in response to this obvious compliment. Jiang Hai's face wasn't ugly, but it was still lacking when it came to handsomeness. Whether it was his previous handsomeness, thick eyebrows and big eyes, or his current handsomeness, the standard of feminine handsomeness, Jiang Hai couldn't even come close. Jiang Hai had a slightly long head with medium-length hair. It wasn't too long, but it wasn't too short either. It was very ordinary. Single eyelids. Because he used to wear glasses, his eyes were smaller. His nose wasn't very straight, but the tip of his nose was a little big. His mouth wasn't big, but it wasn't thin either. Of course, it had nothing to do with thickness. The only thing that met the standard of being handsome was his sharp chin. Jiang Hai was born with this. He was born with an oval face. Such a deputy face would not be a big deal in the crowd. If he was in Huaxia, it would be difficult to recognize him on the street without special attention. Such a face could be considered handsome, which only proved that this person was good at talking. There are a lot of people tonight. After giving the person in charge a friendly hug, Jiang Hai looked at the people around him and said with satisfaction. Many people meant that the things he wanted to sell were popular, and the popular things naturally proved that the things he wanted to sell this time could be sold at a high price. Of course, that thing of yours is a good treasure. Most of these people are here for that thing. It seems that this time you are really going to become a rich man. Looking at Jiang Hai, the person in charge smiled and gave him a punch as he spoke. Jiang Hai's expression changed. Same to you. It's not like you don't want to earn money. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also smiled and gave him a punch back. This is your admission ticket and token. If there's anything you like, you can raise it. I know that without that thing, you're also quite rich. Oh right, why didn't you bring your female companion? After the greetings, the person in charge had to receive other people, so he changed the topic and gave Jiang Hai a number plate with 108 printed on it. This is Jiang Hai's number plate. In a while, if Jiang Hai likes something, he can raise this plate and buy it. Don't I have to wear formal clothes? They don't want to wear it, so I have to do it myself. After receiving the plate, Jiang Hai explained to the person in charge and said with a smile. Indeed, if it wasn't for the fact that this auction was his own item and he had never participated in an auction before, he wouldn't have come. Wearing a formal suit was too annoying. Do you need me to arrange a female companion for you? Seeing that Jiang Hai really didn't bring a female companion, the person in charge asked in a low voice, but Jiang Hai smiled and shook his head. In fact, when he just came in, there were many small models outside. He hoped that he could use these people to go in and get familiar with them. But unfortunately, these girls are actually ambitious. What they want is just to come in and spend a night with Jiang Hai. If he is stained by them, then Jiang Hai will be in trouble. This is what he can't bear. Forget it, I will go in by myself. After Jiang Hai finished, he patted the person in charge on the shoulder and walked in. After passing through the front hall, when Jiang Hai walked into the auction hall, he couldn't help but feel a little surprised because the hall here is really big, although it is not the annual spring auction of the auction house. However, it was obvious that Phillips didn't use an ordinary auction venue to deal with Jiang Hai. In this hall, which was about 5,000 square meters, there were 2 long tables on both sides with many snacks on them. Of course, they were all cold meals, such as sausages, cakes, fruits, and so on, so that people wouldn't be too bored. The chairs used during the auction were also very particular. It wasn't like in the movies, where many people sat on small chairs and raised their placards. Instead, every group of guests will have a small round table. The main seat is facing the auction stage, and there is a fixed iPad on the table for guests who are a little far away to see the situation. They can also use their hands to rotate the item three-dimensional, see all the details, and check the information of this thing. Of course, what can be confirmed is that the things here must be real, otherwise, their reputation will be ruined. Jiang Hai glanced at the scene here. He has to admit that the layout here is really quite good. It gives people a very modern feeling. At least, Jiang Hai is still quite interested in this place. Jiang Hai's number is 108, which is number 8. In order to show that there are more people on his side, the numbers start from 101. In this hall, there are 6 tables in a row. Jiang Hai's number 8 is just in the middle of the second row. Not to mention that Jiang Hai is the owner of the last auction item. Jiang Hai himself is worth 1 billion yuan. There is no problem for him to sit here. Jiang Hai sat here and looked back and forth. He found that most of the people here actually know each other. They are chatting with each other or bragging. Jiang Hai does not know any of the people here, so he looked at his watch and found that there is still more than half an hour. Jiang Hai got up first and went to get some food back. He will be here, playing mobile games while eating, waiting for the auction to start. But the food he took is really too little, and it was finished in a short time. Just as Jiang Hai was about to get up again to get some food, a voice interrupted his action. "Hello, we meet again." Hearing this slightly strange English, Jiang Hai couldn't help but look up and find that he really knows the visitor. It is the Middle Eastern nouveau riche who wanted to buy the yacht he liked when he bought the yacht. "Hello, I didn't expect to see you here again." Seeing the other party's kind smile, Jiang Hai immediately stood up, shook hands with him, and said politely. Jiang Hai is like this. If others respect him, then he will be very kind to others. I had already left and went to Panama, but I heard that there are good things here, so I came back. How is it? Is the boat still good? After shaking hands with Jiang Hai, the Middle Eastern nouveau riche opposite him asked politely. If you don't mind, let's sit down and talk. That boat is not bad. Motioning the other party to sit down and talk, Jiang Hai also said with a smile. At the same time, Jiang Hai also glanced at the other party's position and found that the other party should be diagonally to his side, position 103. Because at this time, except for the main seat, all the other seats are full. Except for a bodyguard, the rest are women in black veils. In the whole room, only this table is dressed like this. If he doesn't sit there, where else can he sit? As expected of the Middle Eastern nouveau riche, the position there is actually the best. Of course, my Eastern friend, let me introduce myself first. My name is Du Feynman Weha Muhammad bin Rashid Ayun Uktam. I know, for you, this name is a bit too long, but my friends call me Du Feynman, you can call me that too. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the nouveau riche didn't care about this and sat directly opposite Jiang Hai and said with a smile. Hello, Du Feynman, my name is Jiang Hai, from Hua Xia, you can call me Jiang. Listening to the other party's tongue-twisting name, Jiang Hai quickly followed the advice. He didn't want to be called by his full name, in fact, he didn't remember it until now. Alright, Jiang. It's fate that brought us together. I think we'll meet again. After the two introduced themselves, the door in the distance gradually closed. Du Feynman, who was not attending the auction for the first time, knew that it meant that the auction was about to start. Since the auction was about to start, it was not good for him to sit on Jiang Hai's side all the time. Instead, he smiled at Jiang Hai and returned to his seat. Not long after he sat down, Jiang Hai saw another door in the distant room. An old man walked out with a group of security guards. For an auction like this, first, video recording was not allowed, and second, no trouble was allowed. It was natural for some security guards to be here. For the arrival of these people, the rich businessmen present didn't care. Instead, they all continued to sit there and look at the old man on the stage. This old man was actually not an ordinary person. He was the best auctioneer in Philips, and this time, he specially rushed over from Europe. Dear ladies and gentlemen, we are fated to meet today to verify the ownership of these treasures. I am honored to be this time's auctioneer. After the old man got on the stage, he bowed to the people in front of him and then began to speak. In fact, the opening speech was similar to what Jiang Hai thought. It was nothing more than setting the tone for the following auction. According to the old man, there were only a total of 31 items in this auction. It was understandable. These items should have been originally prepared for the autumn auction or the next spring auction. However, because of Jiang Hai's item, they were released in advance. After listening to the old man's words, Jiang Hai knew that he could check the detailed information of all the auction items today in the iPad in front of him. If he didn't say, Jiang Hai wouldn't have known. While the old man was happily speaking, Jiang Hai also checked according to what he said. Sure enough, he found the catalog of this auction in an app. There were a total of 31 items in this auction, and Jiang Hai's armor was the last item. It was also the finale item of this auction. The 30 items before it were basically everything. Some European oil paintings, gems, and even modern art. However, the item that Jiang Hai was most familiar with was a pair of blue and white porcelain vases. Needless to say, this should be the one he sold. Among these 31 items, this vase's ranking wasn't high, but it wasn't low either. It was ranked 16th. It seemed that this thing wasn't as valuable as he thought. The blue and white porcelain vases from the Wanli era weren't that valuable. Well, let's not talk too much. Next, let's welcome our first auction item today, number 78666547. Chapter 315. As the old man's voice fell, the two women carefully walked over with a painting in their hands. This was the item number 78666547. It was an oil painting. According to the description, this oil painting wasn't very old. It was probably around 100 years old. However, the person who painted this oil painting was very famous. Henri Matisse, a famous French painter, the founder and main representative of the Fauvism oil painting. He was also a sculptor, a printmaker, and a master who lived until modern times. He didn't pass away until 1954, so the value of his oil paintings wasn't very high at first, but they had become very popular in recent years. Someone once said that he and Picasso were the two greatest painters of the 20th century, and could be compared to Picasso. This showed the value of his paintings. It was a good choice to use his painting as the opening. Looking at this painting, which he didn't know what the hell it was, Jiang Hai couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. However, the guests at the other tables were very interested, and many of them began to study it. The starting price of this painting is $800,000, and each bid must be no less than $50,000. Please bid. At this moment, the old man on the stage had finished introducing the painting and began to speak. As his voice fell, someone in the distance had already raised a sign. 800,000, someone had already bid, but this price didn't stay for even a second before it was pushed down by others. 80, 85, 90, 95, 100. Although no one directly called a high price, each raised sign represented $50,000. Unknowingly, about a minute later, the price of this painting had been raised to $1.6 million. At this time, the bidding slowed down, and the main competitors became the 4 or 5 families. These companies are all very powerful. They are also the main potential buyers of your armor. Just as Jiang Hai was watching the scene, the person in charge of Phillips walked to Jiang Hai's table with a smile and sat down beside Jiang Hai. Oh. What do you mean? Jiang Hai was bored here, so he didn't mind letting the person in charge explain to him. After all, it was his first time attending such an auction, so it was inevitable that he wasn't confident. The main potential buyers of your armor this time are 4 groups of people. The first group is the Arabian at table 103. Pointing at the table in front of Jiang Hai, the person in charge whispered. Du Feynman? Jiang Hai still remembered this person and couldn't help but ask in a low voice. Oh. You know him? Hearing that Jiang Hai actually knew his name, the person in charge couldn't help but look at him with some surprise. I don't really know him. I met him once when I bought a yacht. We just introduced ourselves. Jiang Hai shook his head. Obviously, they had met twice, so they didn't really know each other. Jiang Hai was the kind of person who would do that. Oh, then let me introduce him to you. This is Du Feynman Vieux Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum. He is not an ordinary person. His father was originally the 3rd Prince of Dubai. He is the brother of the current king, but he did not inherit the throne later. Instead, he was given a large number of oil fields. This is his only legal heir. The current defense minister of Dubai is his uncle, and the tourism minister is his uncle. He mainly manages food issues. He is a real local tyrant. Listening to the person in charge's introduction, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be a little surprised. He didn't expect this young man to be a local tyrant. There are also 3 forces. One is the Spaniards. Your armor is the armor of Philip III of Spain. Fortunately, I don't know where you got this armor from. If you got it from some shipwreck, they would have already jumped. The Spaniards' international reputation has always been bad, especially in the area of shipwrecks. Although Spain is located in the European Union, in fact, the living standards of their people are really not much different from those in China. The only good thing is that they have good welfare. Other things, whether it is income, medical care, public facilities, etc., are not much worse than those in first-tier cities in China. Of course, compared with some second-tier, third-tier, and even rural areas, they still have a big advantage. After all, the country is not that big. There is another group of people, those are the businessmen from Soviet Russia, the real giants. In this world, except for the Huaxia people, they are the only ones who can compete with the Middle Eastern local tyrants. After introducing the Spaniards, the person in charge pointed to another table, where there was a table of Caucasians with slicked back hair and big noses. Jiang Hai's home is in Bing City. There are many Soviet Russian women in Bing City. Of course, there are also some men. Jiang Hai is no stranger to the Soviet Russians. The last wave of people who can afford to buy it is the British over there. The British have a grudge against the Spanish. Everyone knows this, so for this set of armor, they won't let the Spanish take it back easily. Finally, the person in charge introduced a table in the farthest corner. That table is the British. Looking at the 4 groups of people, Jiang Hai shrugged. He is not interested in these people. As long as he can make more money, who these people are and what they do has nothing to do with him. When the person in charge was introducing these businessmen, the first oil painting was successfully auctioned off. In the end, the oil painting was sold for $3.7 million. It is not particularly high, but it is definitely not low either. The people who bought this oil painting were the Soviet Russians mentioned by the person in charge. They are the Far East tycoons. After the first oil painting was auctioned off, the second oil painting attracted Jiang Hai's disdain. If the first oil painting is a Fauvism painting, at least he can tell what it is. But the second oil painting is inexplicable. It was as if there was a child who was holding paint and applying it to the cloth, but as it happened, this painting was even more popular than the first one. The final price was $1 million. Fine. This world is crazy. Jiang Hai really cannot understand. Is this the legendary art? At the very least, when these people bought a painting, they had to know what the painting was about. What was the painting about? Is it a ghost? After complaining, Jiang Hai is too lazy to care about it. The auction is still ongoing. The third item was a set of furniture from the Middle Ages. It was quite useful. In the end, it was auctioned for $3.2 million. It was hard to understand that this set of mahogany furniture was not as valuable as the ghostly painting. It made people speechless. The fourth item was a clay pot, and the fifth was a weapon that was said to have been used by Napoleon. But Napoleon had many weapons in his possession. This item wasn't very valuable, but it was eventually sold for the highest price to date, $9.6 million. It was bought by a Russian tycoon, if there was one thing that the Russian tycoon could boast about. One is during World War II, when they single-handedly stopped Germany's blitzkrieg attack. Germany had no choice but to invade Africa because the Soviet Union could not defeat them. The other achievement is when Napoleon swept across Europe. Napoleon almost unified all of Europe, but in the end, he was defeated by the Soviet Union. Therefore, Napoleon's collection is still very valuable in the Soviet Union. The auction continued, and soon, it was time for Jiang Hai's first collection, which was the pair of blue and white porcelain vases. In the end, the vases were sold for $1.65 million. The auction house still made a profit. After all, in Miami, they only had to pay 35% of the state tax, which was $577,500. Other than that, the auction house made a profit. Of course, a big auction house like theirs can reduce the tax. It is estimated that they only need to pay $500,000. In addition to the $1 million that they paid to Jiang Hai, they also made more than $100,000, which is a small profit. After the pair of blue and white porcelain vases, Jiang Hai is a little distracted, because he is not very interested in the following items. Maybe there are many cultural differences between the East and the West. At least, Jiang Hai does not think that these things are worth his attention. Jiang Hai only took a cursory glance at the next 15 items, but he didn't see anything that caught his eye. More than an hour later, it is time for the last item, which is the finale of the evening, Jiang Hai's golden armor of Philip III. As the auctioneer finished speaking, two strong men carrying a huge box walked over. As the box was opened, the armor inside appeared in front of everyone. There is no need for the auctioneer to say anything. As soon as the armor lit up, almost everyone sighed in admiration. Looking at the armor in front of him, the auctioneer slowly walked over. I don't need to say much. I think everyone is basically here for this armor. Although Philip III's reputation in European history wasn't particularly good, he was still the man who once ruled the entire Atlantic Ocean. I don't need to say much about the collectible value of his armor. I think all the experts present here are very clear. The starting bid for this armor is $100 million, but each increment is $1 million, $130 million. However, before his voice fell, he was already interrupted by a voice from below. Following everyone's gaze, he found that the person who made the bid was from the Spanish table. It was obvious that they were very anxious. $150 million. But unfortunately, not everyone will give them face. At least according to the person in charge, the other 3 families who have the ability to compete tonight will not easily let go of this collection, so the British side bid first. 200 million. But before everyone could recover, the Russian tycoon raised his hand. Wow! Although it is far from the price Jiang Hai and the others estimated, the fierce competition from the beginning still surprised everyone. Jiang Hai's mouth unconsciously opened. Go ahead, the higher the price, the happier he will be. Chapter 316. 250 million. Just as the Soviet Union's giant head finished shouting, before the audience could focus on them, the Spanish player had already shouted. The 50 million tier was indeed very surprising. Hearing the price, the British guy hesitated for a moment. In fact, before they came here, they had already investigated the value of this armor. In addition to the special feelings of the Spanish government, other countries basically wanted to collect and humiliate this country. But there is also a limit to the humiliation, such as $500 million. Now that the price has been raised to 250 million, to be honest, the arrogant British guy was a little scared. 280 million. But just because they are scared, it doesn't mean that others are scared too. At this time, the Middle Eastern guy at table 103 finally made his move. He raised the sign in his hand, and his assistant quoted a new price. 300 million. Hearing the Middle Eastern guy's bid, the Spanish guy immediately followed. Looking at the Spanish guy gritting his teeth, the Russian guy who didn't care at all laughed. Making these Europeans unhappy is indeed something they are happy to see, so the Russian guy slowly raised his hand. 400 million. As the big guy's slightly curly voice fell, the British guy withdrew from the bidding for the first time. For them, they just want to annoy the Spanish. After all, this armor isn't an item from the United Kingdom. Bastard. The Spanish guy at the table in the distance couldn't help but curse in a low voice. He raised the sign in his hand again. This time, they didn't call out a bid, which means that they only added the most basic 1 million. In fact, in their view, the price of 400 million is almost the price they want. After all, Spain's annual GDP is only ranked 6th in Europe, and only 13th in the world. The Spanish government won't give them too much money to buy an item like this. And to be honest, they can't bear to pay for it themselves. However, even if they couldn't hold on, it didn't mean that others couldn't. Just as the bid of 401 million was made, the Middle Eastern tycoon raised his hand again. His assistant directly reported a round number. 500 million. As his voice fell, the audience's reaction became even more enthusiastic. Although they had done some research on this set of armor before coming here and knew that the price should be around 1 billion, when the price was actually announced, they really panicked a little. 600 million. Hearing the bid from the Middle East tycoons, the Russian tycoons weren't joking. They added up 100 million. At this time, the Spanish tycoons' faces were ugly. Actually, they were about the same as the British. But compared to the British's 500 million, they had prepared 100 million. The Spanish tycoons' upper limit was 600 million. But now, the Russians had already bid 600 million. Although this was an international symbol, just like the imperial jade seal in China, this price was really unacceptable. As for Jiang Hai, he felt that his breathing had become lighter. Although Phillips had said that this armor could be sold for 1 billion, Jiang Hai still couldn't accept this price. But when the money really appeared in front of Jiang Hai, he was a little dumbfounded. He glanced at the person in charge next to him. Although the person in charge was still very calm, his trembling hands betrayed him. Go and contact the British. Looking at the bidding between the Middle Eastern tycoons and the Far Eastern tycoons, the Spanish decided to compromise. This thing belonged to Europe. Since they couldn't get it, they had to keep it in Europe. They couldn't let the Middle Eastern people buy it. Who knew what they would do with this armor? Put it on a lion? It wasn't like they hadn't done it before. So, the Spanish table quietly went to the British table. After the two sides talked for a while, the Spanish were obviously relieved. At this time, the Middle Eastern tycoon raised the price again, and the price had reached $800 million. 900 million. Looking at the Middle Eastern tycoons who didn't care about money, the Russian tycoons couldn't help but wipe their sweat. Finally, a fat Russian man shouted loudly, but after he finished speaking, he felt as if he had used up all his strength and sat directly on the chair. This was the limit of the Russian side. At this time, the auctioneer also glanced at the person in charge below. This price was actually about right. When the person in charge nodded, indicating that they could count for a few seconds, suddenly another voice was heard. 1 billion. I'll pay $1 billion. As the voice sounded, everyone looked at the Spanish side. They didn't know how they persuaded the British to give them the money, but now they were bidding $1 billion. This thing was really too precious for Europe and for the Spanish. This was the armor of an emperor during their most powerful period. It was as if Li Shimon's armor was suddenly unearthed in modern times. No, not to mention Li Shimon, even if it was Li Ji or Li Longji's armor, it was absolutely priceless. If the government didn't make it clear, the private businessmen would buy it back even if it cost tens of billions. Although Philip III wasn't that amazing, for the Spanish people, their emperor's armor being placed in a museum of another country was a great humiliation for the whole country. No matter how much it cost, they had to buy it. As soon as the price of 1 billion was announced, the whole venue quieted down. Jiang Hai, who was originally very tense, couldn't help but relax. He had reached his final goal, 1 billion. God, this time he really had more than $1 billion. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai was full of joy from the inside out. This was more exciting than doing it. 1 billion first. As for the auctioneer over there, he didn't shout anything this time. Because this price was high enough, he was ready to shout 3 times before dropping the hammer. Looking at the auctioneer's appearance, the Spaniards couldn't help but raise their heads arrogantly. This price was already their limit, but money, there will always be a time when they can earn it back. If this thing is really gone, then it will be a national shame. Just as the auctioneer was about to drop the hammer and the Spanish people were about to cheer, a big hand was raised again. 1 billion. As the voice fell, everyone looked at the owner of the hand. Needless to say, the owner of this hand was the Middle Eastern tycoon, Du Femenvier Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum. Looking at the faint smile on his face, not only the Spanish people, but even the British people felt their faces heat up. This was not a time of war, but an era of peace. What was the most important thing in this world? Money. 100 years ago, Europe dominated the world. But now, the world belonged to the Koreans and the Japanese. As long as they liked something, although history wasn't theirs, they could buy it, no matter what it was. 1 billion going once, 1 billion going twice, 1 billion, sold. As the auctioneer quickly said these 3 sentences and dropped the hammer, the Spanish people helplessly sat back in their chairs. Their national treasure had disappeared just like that. As for Jiang Hai, he also slumped in his chair. There was only a smile on his face. He had made a lot of money this time. After the auction, there was a banquet. Originally, Jiang Hai didn't want to join in the fun, but he felt that he had made 1 billion. Even if he deducted the tax and commission, he would still have 682 million left. Now that he had put it in his bank account, it had slightly exceeded the 1 billion mark. As long as the 3 buyers bought the cows, Jiang Hai's wealth would exceed $2 billion. Thinking about it, he felt that he didn't need to do anything for the rest of his life, no, his next life, the next life, the next life, and the next life after that. It was enough for him to indulge in wine and women. Sometimes, people just needed to have dreams to fight for. In the past, Jiang Hai's dream was to be rich. Now that he was very rich, his dream became to eat and wait for death. Well, he was a child of a plain with no ambition. The banquet was very lively, but the Spanish people weren't there because they had to report what happened today. Apart from them, everyone else was in a good mood. After all, the last piece of armor was their life and fortune, so it didn't matter if they lost it. Especially the Russian tycoons, because they had already bought a lot of goods before this. Ever since the banquet started, Jiang Hai's main goal was to eat. Although he came to this banquet, he still felt out of place in such a scene. He had always thought of himself as a loser. Even though he was very rich now, he was still a loser. He was a loser, but he didn't feel inferior. Instead, he was quite proud. At least he wasn't as hypocritical as those successful people. Of course, this was what he thought. "Hi, Jiang, we meet again." Just as Jiang Hai was eating happily and was about to be full, a familiar voice came from afar. Jiang Hai looked up and saw that it was none other than Du Feimin, who had bought his armor, and his women. "We meet again, Du Feimin. Congratulations." Seeing that it was his rich man, Jiang Hai stood up with a smile. "Congratulations to you too. This is not a small fortune." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feimin also smiled. How did you know it was me?" Hearing his words, the smile on Jiang Hai's face couldn't help but freeze. The hand that was about to reach out couldn't help but retract. Was this person investigating him? If this was really the case, then he had to be careful. Chapter 317. Don't be nervous, my friend. We won't harm our friends because we have faith. Hee, as for how I know that you are the original owner of this armor, first of all, you were too obvious at the auction house. Second, my family also has shares in Philips. Although I can't clearly know the name of the owner of the armor, I can still know the news of a huaxia. Today, you are the only huaxia present. Seeing that Jiang Hai was a little nervous, Du Feimin shrugged indifferently and said to Jiang Hai with a smile. Although Jiang Hai knew that Du Feimin was telling the truth, Jiang Hai still had to be careful. This guy was not as polite as he looked on the surface. In that case, he should have already known that Jiang Hai was the owner of the armor before the auction started. The reason why he came over to get acquainted with Jiang Hai was probably to get close to him. As for the person in charge, it was very likely that this guy had hired him. It seemed that Jiang Hai was still too young. "I just went to deal with the handover of the armor. Your armor has already boarded the plane and is flying to my residence in Dubai. As for your money, Philips is currently transferring it to you. Not a single cent less." As if he saw Jiang Hai's grudge, Du Feimin said with a smile. He had already known about this. "I don't care about the armor. I only care about the money." Seeing Du Feimin sitting directly in front of him, Jiang Hai also slowly sat down. While eating the German roast pork in front of him, he also said with a smile. "That's right, my friend. Don't have any psychological burden. What I gave you is real money." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feimin couldn't help but laugh. What he said was very true. "In that case, my friend, now that the transaction is over, what are you looking for me for?" Putting down the knife and fork in his hand, Jiang Hai looked at Du Feimin and asked curiously. "It's like this, Jiang. I think you also know that our Dubai has recently been undergoing a tourism renovation. I wonder if you are interested in joining us. As my friend, I'll give you the green light all the way." Seeing Jiang Hai's serious appearance, Du Feimin also smiled. Jiang Hai took 1 billion from him, so he naturally wanted to fight for it. This wasn't just 11 pieces. "Oh, Du Feimin, you're not treating me as a friend. Is Dubai's real estate business really that good now?" Looking at Du Feimin, Jiang Hai shook his head and directly rejected his proposal. What a joke, who didn't know? Ever since Dubai's oil wells were about to dry up, the Dubai government decided to turn Dubai into a tourist city. From then on, they built a large number of entertainment facilities and offered cheap land prices to attract foreign real estate developers. But these things were all bubbles. Jiang Hai remembered that a few years ago, Dubai almost went bankrupt because of tourism. At its peak, Dubai owed the outside world more than $30 billion. Fortunately, the Arabian royal families were basically in cahoots with each other. Other countries in the world poured a lot of money into Dubai, which was how Dubai came back from the dead. But even so, there were a lot of unfinished buildings in Dubai. Many people were willing to travel here, but no one was willing to live here. At least, almost no rich people in Huaxia would move there. The cost of living was too high, and it was located in the middle of the desert. Plus, the security wasn't very good. After all, the world of ordinary people was very poor. So many people were willing to travel, but they weren't willing to live there. Jiang Hai would be crazy to develop there. Oh, it seems that my friend is very smart. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feimin didn't care. He knew that as long as this person wasn't stupid, he wouldn't agree to come to Dubai to do real estate business. You're not interested in real estate. Then, are you interested in this? After Du Feimin finished speaking, he took out a piece of hard paper from the sleeve of his robe and handed it to Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai took it and looked at it. His eyes lit up. If he wasn't interested in real estate, he was very interested in this thing. Can you tell me why you're selling this to me? Jiang Hai asked curiously as he tapped on the hard paper in front of him. He really didn't understand. One had to know that there were people dying every day in the world for this thing. Although this thing wasn't much, it was the lifeline of the world. Jiang Hai didn't believe that a pie would fall from the sky. Of course, I believe that you won't easily sell this thing to others. This is also a kind of investment. I'll leave it with you first. When the time comes, I'll redeem it. Of course, if you want to sell it, it's up to you. After all, this thing is yours, Du Feimin said seriously as he looked at Jiang Hai. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai gently tapped on the hard paper in front of him. Now, he was considering whether this business was good or not. After hesitating for about 5 minutes, Jiang Hai smiled. He felt that he was thinking too much. No matter what Du Feimin wanted the money for, he did get what he wanted. Most importantly, this thing would never depreciate. Even when he got these things, the value of these things was already rising. Jiang Hai didn't know that Du Feimin's things should be able to sell at a higher price. Why did he let him take advantage of this? But looking at his smile and his eyes looking at the Soviet Russians in the distance from time to time, Jiang Hai understood that by selling his resources to the enemy, he could indeed obtain higher profits in a short time. But in the future, this would be the trump card in the hands of his enemy. And Jiang Hai, an outsider, would be a good place to deal with it. Deal. Thinking about the value of this thing, Jiang Hai didn't need to refuse. He directly extended his hand and said to Du Feimin. Du Feimin also extended his hand with a smile. In fact, his thoughts were similar to Jiang Hai's. In this business, Jiang Hai would make money, and he would make time. After talking to Jiang Hai, Du Feimin left. Jiang Hai also left after eating. But he wasn't in a hurry to return to the hotel. Instead, he went to Philip's auction house, where the person in charge had been waiting for him for a long time. As Jiang Hai's phone rang, $282 million were deposited into his bank account. The $400 million that disappeared were exchanged for the stack of paper in his hand. But Jiang Hai was very optimistic about this stack of paper. Taking these papers, Jiang Hai returned to the hotel. Although he looked calm on the way, he was actually on guard the whole time. What if Du Feimin set up a trap for him and turned around to attack? He was on guard against all the passers-by. What if they tried to rob him? He was on guard against the whole world. In Jiang Hai's eyes, there wasn't a single place in the world that was safe. What he needed to do was return to the hotel as soon as possible. Only then could he feel a little more at ease. Jiang Hai drove all the way to the entrance of the hotel very quickly. Naturally, he asked the doorman to park the car. Jiang Hai quickly walked into the hotel. A big, romantic man was lying on the lawn at the entrance of the hotel. Jiang Hai's heart couldn't help but beat a little faster. It wasn't that Jiang Hai was timid, but that this stack of paper was really too important. "Jiang, you're back." When Jiang Hai returned to his room, his clothes were unknowingly soaked. When they saw him come back, Aphrodite and the other girls, who had been watching TV, couldn't help but stand up to welcome Jiang Hai. But even when they stood up, they gave Jiang Hai a fright. Seeing Jiang Hai's actions, the girls couldn't help but stare blankly. "Phew, it's fine. It's not aimed at you guys. Wait for me here first. We'll leave tomorrow and return to Boston." Looking at the girls, Jiang Hai smiled and comforted them. He hesitated for a moment, but he still trusted the girls. He walked up to them and rubbed their heads one by one before returning to his room. As soon as he entered his room, Jiang Hai took out the file he had been holding in his clothes. Opening the file and looking at the stack of papers inside, the corners of Jiang Hai's mouth couldn't help but open. From the looks of it, the stack of papers in Jiang Hai's arms was only worth $400 million. $400 million wasn't a small amount, but it wasn't worth it for Jiang Hai to be so nervous. After all, he had nearly $600 million in his bank account. It wasn't that he didn't care about the $400 million, but that the $400 million was actually a protective talisman and choice for Jiang Hai. This stack of papers wasn't just worth $400 million. In fact, it was a pass to a higher level. Even if he didn't want to use it to go to a higher level, he could use it in exchange for more benefits and more money. Even when he encountered a crisis that he couldn't solve himself, such as when his opponent was the American government or some large tycoon, this thing would play a crucial role. 400 million? That was just the starting price. Even if Jiang Hai sold it now, no one would be able to touch it without $500 million. And most importantly, as time went by, the money would increase, and there was no possibility of it going to waste. What could make Jiang Hai so confident? Even if it was the fruit company or Coca-Cola, they wouldn't dare say that their stock prices wouldn't drop at all. But Jiang Hai was confident that this stack of papers would make a profit of $1 million. There was no way the price would drop. Changfu was even much bigger than the fruit company and Coca-Cola. It had zero risk and high returns, because this thing was called oil futures. Chapter 318. Jiang Hai didn't know how he fell asleep that night. When he woke up the next day, he was already preparing to return to Boston. With a stack of papers on him, he really wasn't in the mood to let him play here. After getting out of bed, Jiang Hai told Aphrodite and the other girls that they were going to clean up. Originally, Jiang Hai was reluctant to leave his yacht, which cost him more than $5 million, here, so he planned to drive the yacht along the east coast of the United States all the way back to Boston. He estimated that it would take about a week even if he didn't get off the yacht. But at this time, Jiang Hai was not at ease. The yacht was only worth $5 million. If he handed it over to the towing company, it would arrive in about 10 days. But the stack of paper in his arms was worth $400 million, no, it was worth at least $400 million. He didn't want to lose a watermelon for sesame seeds. This was not what he should do. So early this morning, Jiang Hai decided to fly back directly. The girls had heard Jiang Hai's words last night, so they were almost done packing at night. This morning, they checked their belongings for the last time, took their phones, chargers, and so on, and could leave. Jiang Hai and the others had gained a lot from this trip to Miami. Everyone had gained something. Let's talk about the 10 girls first. After this trip to Miami, the 10 girls could finally speak openly after returning. At the same time, because of the life and death situation, the bond between them and Jiang Hai had become tighter and tighter. They liked Jiang Hai more and more. From worship and gratitude at the beginning, they had gradually turned into dependence. From dislike and dislike, they had gradually moved toward love. Of course, Jiang Hai didn't know this. He understood that the gains of these girls, in addition to being able to speak openly, the most important thing was that they bought a lot of new clothes back home. Although the aunties in Jiang Hai's manor had already begun to accept these girls, they still didn't dare to do so. However, with these women's taste, it was really difficult to buy good-looking clothes. Miami was a model's paradise. Here, you could buy anything you wanted. Jiang Hai gave them pocket money, plus the salary they had saved over the past few months, so they could spend a lot of money here. Although they couldn't afford luxury brands, they bought a lot of small things. When they came, each of the girls had a small backpack, but when they went back, they all brought a suitcase. In addition to the girls, Moses Adams also gained a lot. The most obvious thing was that his income had increased a lot. Maybe it was for hush money, or maybe it was for favors. Since they came to Miami, Jiang Hai had given Moses Adams a total of nearly $2 million. If Moses Adams earned this money step by step, it would take him a few years to earn it back. So in response to Jiang Hai's generosity, Moses Adams also offered his friendship and loyalty. As for the one who gained the most, Jiang Hai thought it was himself. This time in Miami, Jiang Hai's net worth doubled, and he also got a priceless stepping stone to the upper class, 400 million yuan of oil futures. Even if Jiang Hai did not have any ambition for the upper class, this was also a talisman. No matter who he offended, as long as he was not considered a traitor by the American government, this thing in his hand could protect him. It should be known that in the United States, it was not the American government that had the power, but the major consortia. Among all the consortia, the most famous one was naturally Rockefeller. Although the reputation of this consortium was very bad, there was no need to doubt the ability of this oil consortium. So in Jiang Hai's view, he really made a lot of money this time. After packing up, Jiang Hai went downstairs first, mainly because he had to check out and discuss the car. Because Moses Adams was going back to Boston with them today, the car rental company had been informed to come and pick up the car they rented. Because of this, they needed to take the hotel car to the airport, which the hotel had no problem with. Jiang Hai and the others lived in a presidential suite and a suite. It was the hotel's responsibility to take them to the airport. So they immediately contacted a luxury minibus to pick up Jiang Hai and the others to the airport. Jiang Hai and the others were not particularly pretentious. After everything was done, Jiang Hai sat by the window of the hall, waiting for Aphrodite and the others to come down, while waiting for the minibus. At the same time, he looked at Miami outside. Although he had been here for a long time, Jiang Hai really liked this city. Of course, it would be better if there were no gray areas. Miami was a very slow and leisure city. Compared with the fast pace of Boston and New York, Jiang Hai preferred this slow feeling. It was indeed a famous tourist city in the United States. At the same time, Jiang Hai also thought, when I chose the ranch, why didn't I choose here? Maybe the ranch here is not good, but the fishing ground here is very good. You know, this is a tropical place. It is as warm as spring all year round, unlike Winthrop. Although it is not as cold as Ice City in winter, it can still freeze people to death. At least the weather made Jiang Hai like this place, but it was too late to say anything now. For now, Jiang Hai has taken root in Winthrop, and he has no plans to go elsewhere for the time being. Just as Jiang Hai was feeling emotional, he suddenly saw a man lying on the lawn of the hotel at this time, a white man. When Jiang Hai came back last night, he saw him lying there. It seems that he has been lying here all night. When he saw him last night, maybe because it was too dark, and Jiang Hai had a lot of treasures, he didn't dare to look at him carefully. Now that it was daytime, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be surprised when he saw this person, because this person looks a bit familiar. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai couldn't help but walk out of the hotel and come to the lawn outside. When Jiang Hai walked over, the big man seemed to have heard Jiang Hai's footsteps. He opened his eyes and sat up, but as soon as he sat up, he covered his ribs and looked at Jiang Hai vigilantly. After seeing that Jiang Hai didn't seem to be a threat to him, he lay down again, but his eyes didn't close again. "It's you are that boxer?" Looking at the white man lying down again, Jiang Hai tried to recall who this person was in his mind. It was one of the two boxers that he had hired when he went to the bar. The Muay Thai master was nowhere to be found. This big man was the wrestling master. Jiang Hai had no idea where he was. However, what made Jiang Hai a little surprised was that the income of underground fighting should be very high. Why would he appear here? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the big man just glanced at him and didn't speak, still lying there. "Why are you here? It seems that your injuries haven't been cured. Didn't you win?" Seeing this person's appearance, Jiang Hai sat beside him with some curiosity. He didn't see clearly just now, but now that he was closer, he noticed the situation of this person's body. The injuries on this person's body had only been treated simply. His face was still blue and purple, and the wound on his head seemed to be rotting and had begun to fester. His ribs were also blue and purple. Needless to say, his broken ribs were not fixed properly. This made Jiang Hai feel a little strange. He had heard that people who fought in underground boxing would get a lot of money if they won. What was this situation? "Conrad, I'm hungry." Seeing that Jiang Hai not only didn't leave, but also sat beside him, the white man spoke for the first time. But as soon as he spoke, Jiang Hai frowned. Although this man's eyes were clear, Jiang Hai could tell from his somewhat slurred speech that this person seemed to be sick. Conrad should be his name, and he was hungry. Well, from this sentence, the problem could be seen. "Then I'll treat you to a meal. What do you want to eat? Steak, or a buffet?" Looking at the big man in front of him, Jiang Hai also had some thoughts of hiding. It was fate that they met. The most important thing was that Jiang Hai was in a good mood now, so he was prepared to help him. Hamburger, pizza. But unfortunately, in the face of the temptation of steak, the big man shook his head. He didn't like to eat this thing. Instead, he pointed across the street and continued to speak to Jiang Hai in a staccato voice. "Let's go, I'll treat you to a meal." Eating a hamburger? Jiang Hai didn't care about treating him. He waved at him directly, indicating that he should go with him. The big man glanced at Jiang Hai and didn't have too much vigilance. Instead, he stood up while clutching his ribs and followed Jiang Hai to the hamburger shop across the street. Originally, Jiang Hai didn't know much about this guy. Now that he stood up and walked forward, even Jiang Hai couldn't help but exclaim because this guy was taller than he imagined. Jiang Hai was originally 186 meters tall, which wasn't particularly short in Huaxia. But after coming to the United States, this height was basically slightly taller than the average height. But since the tattoo, Jiang Hai's body had undergone a second growth. In fact, now Jiang Hai's height had exceeded 1.9 meters and reached about 1.92 meters. Although he didn't measure it in detail, he was now considered a tall man. However, standing next to this guy, Jiang Hai found that his head only reached his shoulders. And this was because he was injured, so he needed to cover his wound. Otherwise, he would be even taller. This guy was definitely more than 2.1 meters tall. When Jiang Hai was looking at this person had already walked quickly across the street and directly walked into a Burger King. In the United States, Western fast foods such as hamburgers were everywhere. Not only were there many small shops opened by people, there were also many small shops. Kaifeng, which dominated the domestic market, was really not a big brand in the United States. It was understandable. The price of chicken and beef was about the same. What was there to compare? You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.